Chapter 2761. Although she didn't dislike him anymore, every time she saw him, her mood would be inexplicably terrible. She had the urge to kick him far away. Although this feeling was strange, it couldn't be love, right? She knew that her feelings towards Rongyue Tanlan were very complicated, and even she couldn't figure it out. But it could be said that she instinctively hated him. It could also be said that they were not on the same path. They could even be strangers. At most, she could treat him as an ordinary friend. The only thing she couldn't say was that she liked him. Even if she liked Rongyue Tianhuan, it was impossible for her to like this Eighth Highness. However, the snake beauty opposite her became happy. It moved closer to her and tapped the ice layer near her face with its fan. It looked at her with sparkling eyes. You like me, but you don't dare to admit it. Even in the depths of your heart, you rejected it because your subconscious thought that I was the source of so much harm to you. You instinctively felt that I was dangerous, and you were afraid that you would be hurt beyond redemption. So you buried your heart deep. You buried it too deep, and even you were deceived. You actually hypnotized yourself that you would never like me. The snake beauty spoke slowly, using Rongyue Tianlan's voice. It was elegant, but it pierced straight into one's heart. It moved closer and closer to her, its handsome face almost touching hers. Its eyes seemed to have a whirlpool that wanted to suck in a person's soul. Ji Shunyu looked as if she was hypnotized. She didn't speak anymore. Ripples flashed across the snake beauty's eyes, as if it was proud. It slowly leaned its forehead against Ji Shunyu's forehead. Little Shunyu, admit it. You like me. I am the person in the depths of your dreams, the love of your life. For me, you can give up anything, even your life. Ji Shunyu seemed to be completely under its control. She repeated what it said. However, she changed the relationship. For example, she said the last two sentences, for you, I can give up anything, even my life. The snake beauty smiled in satisfaction. Good girl. Long tentacles extended from the hair on its head, drilling towards Ji Shunyu's forehead. Tentacles were originally extremely soft and tender, but this snake beauty's tentacle was like a sharp needle, slowly piercing into the layer of ice that even its fangs couldn't bite through. The blood-red line was about to touch Ji Shunyu's skin on her forehead. The snake beauty's eyes grew brighter and brighter, and the scales all over her body trembled in excitement. This woman was a rare, divine monarch, and she was still a virgin. Her blood was the purest, and her soul was the purest. As long as its tentacles pierced her forehead, it would be able to suck her brain juice and devour her soul. Its power would increase tremendously, and it might even be able to transform into a human. Just as the blood-red tentacle was about to touch Ji Shunyu's forehead, her eyes suddenly blinked, and a mocking smile appeared on her lips. I like you? Are you out of your mind? The snake beauty was stunned. The blood-red tentacles seemed to have hit an extremely hard barrier and could not move forward any further. Not only that, but the small part that had drilled into the ice was also frozen by the ice. What was even more bizarre was that the ice seemed to be contagious. It quickly spread along the tentacles to the top of the snake beauty's head. The snake beauty's expression changed greatly. This woman wasn't fooled. He didn't fall for its hypnotic spell. Otherwise, this wouldn't have happened. It desperately tried to pull back its tentacles, but how could it do that in such a short time? Chapter 2762. It was also at this moment that Ji Shunyu, who had been trapped in the ice and unable to move, suddenly moved. She abruptly raised her arm, and with a crashing sound, the ice around her shattered in an instant. A large saber appeared in her palm, and the saber light rippled with a circle of bright light under the moonlight. It directly chopped down on the top of the snake beauty's head, where her tentacles were. The snake beauty let out an extremely shrill hiss, and her entire body, no, the entire snake suddenly split from the middle, split in half. It was a standard split in half, with both sides of the same size. Even if one were to measure with a ruler, one might not be able to split it so evenly. The two halves of the snake beauty's body fell in two different directions, and milky white blood splattered in the air like a flower, and then sprayed on the ground, as if it was raining milky white blood. Ji Shun, you retreated in time and did not get sprayed by the snake's blood. She took a light breath. Her hand that seemed to be holding the knife was very steady, but the cold sweat in her palm had almost soaked the handle of the knife. Just a little bit more. She had almost fallen into this stinky snake's trap. She had almost been led by the nose by this stinky snake. Fortunately, she had woken up in time. Her feelings towards Rong Yu Tianlan were indeed a little complicated, and unlike other people, she seemed to hold a grudge against him. But the most important thing was that this person had affected her whole life and caused her life to be a lot bumpy. Wasn't it normal for her to have such feelings towards such a person, saying that she liked him and that she would be willing to die for him? She was talking in her sleep. If possible, she would rather let him die. She kicked half of the snake's body and sneered. I like him. Who does he think he is? He's a playboy, and I don't want him even if he was given to me for free. You even transformed into his appearance to seduce me, and even asked me to die for him. Is your brain made of tofu? TSK, TSK. If you didn't transform into him, I might have been merciful and left you with an intact corpse. But since you've turned into him, then don't blame me for using you to practice my knife. At this point, she seemed to have noticed something. She raised her head abruptly, and the broadsword in her hand almost chopped down subconsciously. Not far away stood a person with picturesque features and a poetic elegance. He held an oil paper umbrella in his hand, and his ink-black hair draped over his shoulders. He stood in the white snow with the umbrella slightly slanted. The green trees and rocks behind him served as a foil to him. It was Rong Yue Tianlan. His eyes were as deep as two wells as he faintly said, Did you have a good time chopping them? Ji Shanhue. She looked at the dead snake that had been cut into two halves on the ground and then looked at him. She gripped her knife warily. She clearly saw Rong Yue Tianlan heading towards the west. Logically speaking, her route shouldn't coincide with his. How could he appear here? Could it be that this was a clone of the stinky snake? Ji Shanyu really wanted to give it another try. However, the aura of the person in front of him was too strong. She was no different from the real Rong Yue Tianlan. Ji Shanyu couldn't decide whether to cut her or not. In the blink of an eye, Rong Yue Tianlan had already arrived in front of her. It was a dangerous distance, less than a foot away from her. He was within the attack range of her broadsword. Ji Shanyu felt a little itchy. He tilted his head and looked at her. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, and he smiled gently. Do you want to try cutting me again? He was dressed casually, and a faint cold fragrance lingered at the tip of her nose, making her nervous for no reason. Was this real? Chapter 2763. Ji Shanyue's intuition told her the answer. She subconsciously took a step back and asked, Why are you here? Rong Yuishinlin didn't answer. Instead, he slowly circled the dead snake twice and commented, You cut it with great skill. Even the nose was cut in half. It was so even and neat. It seems that your hand was very steady when you cut it, even steadier than mine. Ji Shanyue was speechless. She lowered her head and looked at the dead snake. The dead snake still maintained its appearance before it died. In other words, it still looked like Rong Yuishinlin, but it was cut in half. One was lying on the ground, and the other was standing in front of her. Although she knew that the one lying on the ground was fake, Ji Shanyue still had a strange feeling. She took another 2 steps back and smiled. You flatter me. You flatter me. My knife has always been steady. Rong Yuishinlin narrowed his eyes and looked at her. He smiled coldly and said, If you cut the real me, would you also be so steady? Ji Shanyue was speechless. This, she coughed and said, Of course I wouldn't cut the real you like this. I can still distinguish between the real and the fake. Don't worry, I only cut the fake, not the real one. I can't distinguish. Rong Yuishinlin suddenly sighed. Ji Shanyue didn't understand what he meant and looked up at him. Rong Yue Tianlan stopped talking halfway. He circled around the dead snake again and brushed his sleeves across the dead snake's body. A ball of light flashed past, and the dead snake finally no longer looked like Rong Yue Tianlan. It had become a real snake in two. As he did so, he said casually, Even though I know it's fake, I still feel uncomfortable when I see my other self being cut in half here. Do you feel good when you see me being cut in half? Ji Shunyue was speechless. She touched her nose and said, "It's normal. After all, it's fake." She felt that Rong Yuishinlin was a little evil at this moment. He seemed to be serious about her cutting the fake Rong Yuishinlin in half. After thinking about it, she decided to comfort him. "Your Highness the Eighth Prince, don't worry. Although you once tricked me and caused me to suffer a lot at a young age, I also know that you didn't do it on purpose. You also have your own difficulties. I don't have many good points, but I've always been magnanimous and don't bicker with people. So, I don't take the matter of you tricking me into an old lady to heart, so I won't really cut you down. After all, although we can't be husband and wife, we can still be considered friends. I won't point my knife at my friends." "Friends?" Rong Yuishinlin smiled. Was always good-looking, his smile now even better. "Brothers?" "Ji Shunyue." "I guess so. Where's Tianheng?" Rong Yuetian stared into her eyes. "Tianheng?" Ji Shunyue took a moment to realize who he was referring to. Rong Yuetianwen. Although he wasn't very serious, he was her best friend. The two of them had gone through life and death together. Ji Shunyue curled her lips and said directly, "Different from him." Rong Yuishinlin glanced at her and turned to leave. Ji Shunyue didn't expect him to leave so confidently. She paused for a moment, but still rushed over and asked the question she wanted to ask just now. "How did you get here?" "You took the road to the west." "I went astray," Rong Yuishinlin said without looking back. Chapter 2764. "I went astray," Rong Yuishinlin said without looking back. "Went astray?" That was too far off the mark. Ji Shunyue rubbed her nose speechlessly. "I don't think you could have gone astray." Rong Yuishinlin suddenly stopped. Ji Shunyue was not prepared and almost bumped into his arms. She quickly took 2 steps back and looked up at him in surprise. Rong Yuishinlin said expressionlessly, "I don't have a good sense of direction. What's so strange about me going astray?" So this immortal had a poor sense of direction? No wonder he wanted to follow her just now. Sure enough, the heavens were fair sometimes. They gave him an excellent aptitude and allowed him to cultivate to become a rare immortal. However, at the same time, they also gave him a weakness. For example, he had no sense of direction. It was common for women to have poor sense of direction. Ji Shunyue did not expect men to have poor sense of direction as well. However, seeing Rong Yuishinlin's handsome face, she kindly did not laugh at him. Instead, she changed the topic. "What kind of snake was that? It could actually change its face." "Heart image snake." Rong Yuishinlin only answered with 3 words. He, who was always humorous, was actually a man of few words. Ji Shunyue went through the snake's name in her mind. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat. She remembered now. She had occasionally flipped through a book of strange beasts. On one of the pages, the characteristics of the heart image snake were written. In just a few strokes, it said that this snake was unique to the Misty Mountain and was extremely rare. It was good at reading people's minds and liked to bewitch them. Once a person's mind was bewitched by it, their brain matter would be sucked dry and their soul would be sucked dry. They would never be reincarnated. However, this snake was extremely rare. There were probably only 1 or 2 of them in the entire Misty Mountain. It was not easy to encounter them. She did not expect to be so lucky to encounter this snake and almost lose her life. If she had not been quick-witted and got rid of the heart image snake's bewitchment in time, she would probably be a corpse now. She would not have to go through the marriage annulment ceremony with His Highness Rong Yuishinlin. No wonder people did not want to annul marriages, even if they became resentful couples. It was too risky. She looked up and saw that Rong Yuishinlin had already walked a few feet away. The wind blew his white fox fur coat. White fox fur coat. He was wearing winter clothes. As for her, she was still wearing her autumn dress. It was only now that she felt cold again. A gust of wind blew and she sneezed. She rubbed her hands and hurriedly rummaged through her storage space for winter clothes. However, after searching for a long time, he still couldn't find a single item. She usually only prepared clothes for the current season and had not prepared winter clothes yet. The wind outside was getting stronger and stronger, and her body was getting colder and colder. The coldness seemed to penetrate into her bones, as if it was going to freeze her blood. Forget it. I'll just wear another autumn dress to keep out the cold. One more dress is one more dress. She lowered her head and was about to flip through the slightly thicker documents when a fiery red fur coat was handed to her. Wear this. Ji Xinyu's eyes lit up. She was shivering from the cold, like a starving person seeing a bun. Naturally, she wouldn't be courteous with him at this moment. She quickly draped it over her body. Then, she was pleasantly surprised to find that the firefox fur cloak was extraordinarily warm. As soon as she put it on, she felt a warm current flowing out from the cloak and slowly enveloping her whole body. It made her almost frozen blood flow again, and her hands and feet were also warm. Chapter 2765. What was even rarer was that this cloak was obviously for women, and it was not too long nor too short on her body. It covered her from head to toe and did not make her look bloated. Ji Xinyu could not help but give him a thumbs up. Eighth Highness, I didn't expect you to have the habit of carrying women's clothes around. You are indeed the famous young Master Elegant. You are so considerate to women. The woman by his side was lucky. She didn't have to worry about anything. This young Master Ye's preparation was not ordinary. Compared to his cousin, he was so much stronger. Rong Yuetian was speechless. He crossed his arms and tapped the vertical bamboo flute on his palm. He said calmly, I don't have the habit of carrying women's clothes with me. This cloak was originally prepared for you. Before coming here, he had done his homework. He had specially visited a friend who had come here once a few hundred years ago. He had learned about the strange climate of the Misty Mountain from him, so he had prepared everything well. After entering the Misty Mountain, he wanted to give her the fox cloak. He did not expect her to be so eager to leave him as if she was trying to get rid of trash. He was so angry that he turned and left. It was only now that he had the chance to give it to her. Ji Xinyu was smart. She knew Rong Yuetian's intention after thinking about it. She was still very grateful and saluted him. Thank you. Thank you. You are so considerate. Rong Yuetian only glanced at her and said coldly, You're welcome. He then strode forward. The impression that Rong Yuetian gave people was almost always gentle, elegant, and made people feel like they were bathed in the spring breeze. It was rare to see him being so cold to people. He used to give people the impression of being warm and approachable, but now he was cold and distant. Ji Shun, you could not figure out how she had offended him, but looking at him, he did not look like he would explain. Forget it. Once the marriage was canceled, they would probably not have anything to do with each other anymore. There was no need for her to worry about this. Ji Xinyu looked up at the sky. The moon was already very far to the west. It was almost dawn. She looked up at the highest mountain peak again. They had already walked 2/3 of the way. At this rate, they would probably reach the marriage pillar before sunset. After finishing her business, she would be free. She had not rested well for the past few days. She had only slept for a short while and had almost frozen into an icicle. She had also fought a battle of wits and courage with the heart manifestation snake. She was actually very tired and wanted to rest, but the weather was so cold. Forget it. Let's wait until we're done with our business first before taking a good rest. She then looked at Rong Yuetian, who was moving forward quickly in front of her. She felt that it was not reliable to let a person with no sense of direction lead the way, so she quickened her pace and rushed forward to walk side by side with her. I'll lead the way. You follow me. Rong Yuetian tilted her head and glanced at her. Now you're not afraid that the difficulty of traveling together will be doubled? Ji Xinyu's steps were quick, and she had unknowingly walked to the front. She didn't even turn her head as she said, Walking alone, I even encountered a monster like the heart image snake. How much harder can I get? You're not familiar with the way. It wouldn't be good if you get lost. Fortunately, he ran to her place. If he ran to some other corner and couldn't find the way up the mountain, then wouldn't she have to wait under the marriage pillar until the end of time? Therefore, for the sake of both of them, it was better to go together. Rong Yuetian seemed to chuckle from behind. You're afraid that I'll get lost and not be able to reach the marriage pillar on time? That it's not good to cancel the marriage? Chapter 2766. This person's train of thought was truly abnormal. Every guess was spot on. Ji Xingyue admitted without hesitation, "Yes, we both have our strengths. It's not a bad idea to partner up for once. I know the way very well, so I won't lead you astray. You can also avoid taking unnecessary detours." Rongyue Tianlan, who was behind them, stopped talking. He must have agreed with what she said. The two of them walked one after the other for almost an hour. Ji Shunyue was still a little tired, so she dozed off while walking. As he was walking, he tripped over something and almost fell. She quickly steadied herself and looked down. Suddenly, she took a big step back. It was a snake that almost tripped her. It was a snow-white snake with a head that looked like a human head without any facial features. A heart image snake. The snake lay there stiffly, motionless. Ji Xinyue's first thought was, "No way. Am I back to square one again?" However, she immediately dismissed this thought. This was because this heart manifestation snake looked slightly slimmer and slimmer than the previous one. It even had a pink flower on its head. More importantly, the way this snake died was different from the previous one. The previous one had been cut into two halves while it was still alive, but this one looked like it had been strangled to death. The surroundings were in a mess, as if someone had fought with this snake before it was killed. Moreover, the aftermath of the battle was quite tragic. Many trees and large rocks had fallen and shattered. Ji Shanyue had experienced countless battles, so she was still very knowledgeable. After her shock, she quickly checked the surroundings. She quickly analyzed that this battle should have happened 2 hours ago. Moreover, it looked like that person had suffered a loss first before he started to counterattack. Moreover, that person was obviously wary when he fought with this heart image snake. He didn't have the heart to do it until later on. When that person had probably suffered a great loss, he started to counterattack and strangled the snake to death. She even found the imprint of that person sitting on the ground after strangling the snake to death. In this misty mountain, there were only 2 people left. 2 hours ago, she was entangled with a heart image snake. Therefore, the person who was entangled with this heart image snake was self-evident. Rongyue Tianlan. He had accidentally walked in front of her and even encountered the heart image snake's entanglement. They even fought such a huge battle. It seemed like in terms of dealing with the heart image snake, he, an exalted immortal, was not as good as her, a divine lord. Although her battle was dangerous, she did not create such a tragic battle. That snake was even killed by her in one strike. She was not sloppy at all and was very nimble. However, looking at the battlefield here, Rongyue Tianlan seemed to be injured. Only then did Ji Shunyu remember that Rongyue Tianlan had been following behind them all this while. She hurriedly turned around to take a look, but did not see his shadow. Where did he run off to? Could it be that he walked to the front? That's impossible, right? She did not seem to have seen him pass by just now. Could it be was he lost again? The veins on Ji Shanyu's forehead bulged as she turned around and ran back. The sun rose, and the surrounding temperature rose rapidly. On the trees, on the flowers, on the rocks, in the thorny forest, the ice on everything was rapidly melting. By the time the sun had risen to the height of a pole, the earth had regained its verdant and lush greenery, as if it was a hot summer day. The expensive red fox cloak was spread on a flat big rock. Ji Shunyu sat miserably at a corner of the big rock, while Rongyue Tianlan lay horizontally on the big rock. His head was resting on one of her legs, and he was sleeping peacefully with his eyes slightly closed. Chapter 2767. Ji Xinyu raised her head and yawned. She rubbed her eyes and began to count his eyelashes in order to resist the sleepiness. 1, 2, 20, 100. His eyelashes were quite long, almost the same as hers. After counting his eyelashes, she looked up at the scorching sun in the sky and wiped the sweat off her forehead. She mournfully cursed the ancestors of Misty Mountain in her heart. When it was cold, it would freeze people to death. When it was hot, it would heat people to death. This kind of weather was obviously crazy. At this time, she should have been hurrying along, but she had no choice but to rest. There was no other reason than Rongyue was injured and unconscious. When she found out that Rongyue Tianlan was missing and ran back to look for him, she thought that he had lost his way again. She did not expect him to be unconscious in the middle of the road. When she ran back to find him, a bear was rushing towards him. If she had been a step late, this immortal would have become food in the bear's mouth. Fortunately, she had arrived just in time. She brandished her large saber, causing the man to wail like a ghost and howl like a wolf and scamper away. Only then did she save him. He was unconscious and did not wake up. Jishinyu also did not dare to move him. She dragged him and carried him to a big ice stone to check his injuries. But just as she put him on, his body trembled violently and his teeth chattered. She wrapped the white fox fur around him tightly, but it did not help. She steeled her heart and took off the red fox fur coat that she had just warmed up. She spread it on the big stone and then put him on it. She wrapped him up again and again until he looked like a big baby in swaddling clothes. Ji-Shun-Yu's medical skills were average. She could only treat headaches, fevers, and injuries. She could deal with small illnesses and disasters, but she could not do anything about serious illnesses and injuries. She had already checked him roughly. Other than his private parts, she did not see any external injuries. He should be suffering from internal injuries, but Ji-Shun-Yu could not find out where his internal injuries were. His face was very pale, but his forehead was burning hot. He was obviously having a high fever. Ji-Shun-Yu took out a few antidotes and medicines to treat various internal injuries from her medicine bag. She thought that there must be something to treat the illness, so she gave him a few of each medicine and stuffed it into his mouth. She melted some snow for him to swallow. Probably because she was too anxious, she stuffed too much medicine into his mouth, and he accidentally choked. After a bout of intense coughing, more than half of the pills were coughed up and sprayed all over the floor. But there was an advantage. He coughed and woke up. He opened his eyes in a daze and subconsciously spat out the remaining pills in his mouth. At a glance, he recognized the type, and his handsome face suddenly turned black. He casually threw away those pills. Ji-Shun-Yu's heart ached as she looked at the pills scattered all over the floor. Suddenly, she saw another handful of pills scattered on the floor. She raised her head and met Rongyue Tianlan's watery eyes. He didn't say anything, but she was delighted. She ran to him and said, "You're awake. Hey, why did you throw away all these pills? There are quite a few of them that are very expensive." She didn't hide anything from him. Among the medicines she fed him, there were quite a few that were priceless. Even when she was injured, she couldn't bear to eat it. Now that she gave him a handful, he actually coughed it all up. Ji-Shun-Yu's eyes were filled with pain. She didn't care about the money. What she cared about was the medicine. Rongyue Tianlan weakly rubbed his forehead. "These medicines are useless for my injuries. Even if they are useful, I can't eat so much, and I can't mix them." Chapter 2768. Rongyue Tianlan rubbed his forehead weakly. "These medicines are useless for my injuries. Even if they're useful, I can't take so much, and I can't mix them." She had taken so much medicine. Was she treating them like seasoning beans? Besides, there were strict standards for the combination of medicine and medicine. It was not something that she could mix randomly. Rongyue Tianlan secretly felt lucky. Fortunately, he woke up in time and coughed out all the medicine. Otherwise, this batch of medicine would not only not heal his injuries, but would also make him run more than 10 rounds. Rongyue Tianlan was a genuine miracle doctor. He was a little speechless about her blindness in medicine. Her medical skills were so bad. How did she live for so long? Since he had woken up, he naturally began to treat himself. He had not had a fever for many years. He did not expect that this time it would be so aggressive and directly put him down. His fever was too high. He wanted to take out some medicine from the storage space, but his hands were trembling and his legs were weak. Ji-Shun-Yu could not stand it and directly stretched out her hand. "What are you looking for? I'll help you." For this kind of deity's storage space, without the owner's permission, outsiders could not directly enter. Only those who were extremely strong could take out those who were weak. Rongyue Tianlan's storage space was a little special. Others were in their sleeves, but his was in his chest. In order to take out the medicine for him, Ji-Shun-Yu's small hand went around his chest 3 times. Ji-Shun-Yu was more focused no matter what she did. So she only took out the medicine. She only paid attention to his storage space. She did not notice that it was his chest. After going around his chest 3 times, she finally took out the medicine. She was still proud and shook the medicine bottle in front of his eyes. How is it? I didn't take the wrong one, right? You have so many medicines in your storage space. It took me a long time to find it. Rong Yuishinlin looked at her with an unfathomable expression, then looked at her other hand. Okay, the medicine is out. Can you move your hand away? Ji Shun Yu was a little confused. She looked down at her hand. Then she coughed and calmly withdrew her hand from his left chest. She said calmly, "Sorry, I was in a hurry to get your medicine and didn't notice." She quietly rubbed her hands behind her back, as if trying to wipe away the strange feeling she had when she pressed on the protrusion. At that time, the sky had just brightened and the sun had just risen. The surrounding profound ice had just begun to melt. Amidst the dripping water, under the sunlight, he could clearly see the blush on the calm girl's cheeks, slowly spreading like rouge. The white jade was dyed in red clouds. At such a close distance, he could even smell the faint fragrance of a young girl on her body. His mood suddenly improved. After taking the medicine, he began to meditate. Because Ji Xinyu had left him on the road, she still felt a little guilty. Seeing him meditating, she automatically acted as his guard. Ji Xinyue originally thought that after he finished meditating, he would be able to recover more or less, and the two of them would be able to travel together. Who would have thought that after he finished his meditation, he would say, "I'm so sleepy." Then he collapsed on the red fox cloak, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. As luck would have it, his head happened to be resting on her lap. She naturally wanted to push him away. She wasn't his pillow. Why should she be his pillow? But just as she pushed his head down, his breathing began to quicken, as if he couldn't breathe properly. It's the last day of the month. Everyone, look at the column of monthly tickets again. Click on it to see if there are any monthly tickets left. If there are, then vote them out. Otherwise, they will be invalid. Mumu would feel the pinch. More than a month's worth of drafts were all sent out in 3 days. From today onwards, Mumu began to run naked again. Cough, cough. There was still some during the day. Right? An update now. Chapter 2769. She was so frightened that she hurriedly put his head back on her lap. Only then did his breathing become even again. Ji Xinyue didn't know if this was another way for him to recuperate, so she didn't disturb him. In order for him to recover quickly and go through the annulment ceremony, she endured it. In such a dangerous place, he could sleep soundly, but she couldn't. She forced herself to stay awake and guard him. Then, she realized that his face seemed to be paler than when he first entered the mountain, and he was also a little travel-worn. Her eyes fell on the jade flute hanging from his waist again. The flute was emerald green, but there was a faint blood stain on the top. She curiously took the flute and looked at it, and even smelled it. After analyzing the freshness of the blood, she was sure that it hadn't been stained for long, just 4 to 6 hours ago. What had you been doing 4 to 6 hours ago? Yes, she had been frozen in the ice shell and entangled by the snake beauty. At that time, he should have already defeated the snake beauty who was entangled with him, right? So he played the flute to celebrate? Although this guess was a little silly, Ji Xinyue knew that with Rongyue Tianlan's casual personality and someone who didn't play by the rules, he could really do it. Her gaze fell on his lips again. His lips were extremely perfect, and the color of his lips was also very beautiful. Ji Xinyue heard that in the early years, Rongyue Tianlan's lips were rated as the lips that women in the Fanine continent dreamed of kissing the most. Of course, this was just a rumor. Ji Xinyue had always scoffed at rumors and didn't believe them at all. But now, looking at the lips in front of her, Ji Xinyue suddenly felt that rumors were sometimes true. For example, Rongyue Tianlan's lips, when he slightly curled the corners of his lips and smiled, Ji Xinyue's mind would always think of the words evil man. Now, there were faint traces of blood seeping out from the inside of his lips, and the lines on his lips were also a little broken. It looked like a delicate flower petal that had been crushed, and one couldn't help but feel sorry for him. Ji Xinyue carefully sized up the degree and shape of his lips, and then analyzed that the tear on his lips was caused by the flute. He could work so hard even after playing the flute. What was he after? Logically speaking, he seemed to have been seriously injured after defeating the Snake Beauty. In such a situation, even if he wanted to play a tune to ease his tension, there was no need for him to fight so hard, right? Then why was he doing this? Could it be that there was another use for him to boast? He was an exalted immortal, so his musical instrument should not be just a musical instrument. It should be a Dharma artifact as well. She rubbed her temples and remembered that she had a nightmare when she was frozen in the ice shell. Although she couldn't remember what the nightmare was, she seemed to have heard the faint sound of a flute in her dream. Even when she was fighting a battle of wits and courage with the Snake Beauty, the flute never seemed to stop playing. It was just that she was too focused at that time. All her attention was on the Snake Beauty, so she didn't pay attention to the sounds around her. Furthermore, the sound of the flute was too soft, and it did not seem to be a frequency that humans should be able to hear. It was mixed with the sound of the wind, and if one did not listen carefully, one would not be able to hear it at all. He didn't think too much about it at the time, but now that he thought about it, he did hear a strange sound that was different from the sound of the wind. She frowned and thought about it again. She remembered that she couldn't move in the ice shell at first, and it was extremely difficult for her to even move her little finger. But after she saw through the Snake Beauty's nightmare, she suddenly could move. Chapter 2770. Only then could she break out of the ice and slash the snake. She recalled the timing of Rong Yu Tianlan's appearance. It seemed that he was already there when she slashed the snake. Her heart tightened, and a conjecture emerged in her mind. Could it be that after he defeated the Snake Beauty, he rushed over and saw that she was also entangled with the Snake Beauty, so he came to her rescue? The reason why he did not directly kill the snake was probably because he had some scruples at that time, so he could only desperately use the sound of the flute to control it. Playing the flute would consume a lot of internal energy, so he ended up with injuries on top of his injuries. In the end, he could not hold on any longer and fainted halfway. Ji Xinyue was actually very smart. After so long in the Jianghu, her deductive ability was also extraordinarily strong. She sat there and began to analyze everything in her boredom. The more she analyzed, the closer she got to the truth. He was a mighty immortal and more than 1,000 years older than her. He had also been in the Jianghu for a long time, so he was much stronger than her in both experience and inner force. It didn't make sense that he would be seriously injured when fighting the snake, but she could fight the snake without any injuries. Ji Xinyue originally thought that she was stronger than Rong Yu Tianlan in this aspect, but now it seemed that it was because he helped her behind the scenes. This person was actually very loyal. He was a good friend. Ji Xinyue was originally guarding him by his side. Seeing him sleep on her lap, she felt uneasy. But now that she had deduced so much, she felt that she owed him. If she continued to guard him like this, he would feel much better. She had always been a kind girl. In her gratitude, she moved his body slightly so that he could lie more comfortably. The weather was hot during the day, so he was sweating even when he was sleeping. Ji Xinyue took out a handkerchief and considerately wiped his sweat for him. It was not bad. During the period when Rong Yu Tianlan was sleeping, no evil beast came to attack and disturb them. Other than being a little tired, Ji Xinyue didn't suffer much. The place where she was resting had relatively fewer trees. The sun shone down from above, making people dizzy. Ji Xinyue was also a little dizzy. She was about to pinch herself to wake herself up when mighty immortal Rong Yu, who was on her lap, suddenly moved slightly. She frowned slightly, as if in pain, and murmured 3 words, "Little Moon." Ji Xinyue was stunned. Her heart felt like it was being hit by a hammer. This nickname, when she was very young, her father and mother used to call her that. They said that she was their little moon and that they would love her like a pearl or a treasure. However, this lasted for less than 100 years before she fell out of favor. From a small moon to a dim shooting star, the period of time she was pampered was too short. Even her memories of that period were blurry. She only faintly felt that her father and mother had called her that. After that, no one mentioned it again. until the birth of his younger sister. It was said that when his younger sister was born, her mother, imperial concubine, dreamed of swallowing the moon in her bosom. Thus, imperial father gave his younger sister a nice-sounding name, Tianyu. He even jokingly called her Little Moon. Now, Little Moon had become Ji Tianyu's special nickname. No one remembered that she, Ji Shanyu, had once been called this way by others. Even she herself had forgotten. Now that she suddenly heard Rongyu Atanlan call out like this, her heart skipped a beat. Then she shook her head and smiled. He was still thinking about her little sister, wasn't he? It seemed that his love at first sight was very strong. Chapter 2771. It seemed that he had fallen in love at first sight. Such a dissolute person was a rare, infatuated person. Although she didn't quite understand his love at first sight, she still respected him. She lowered her head to look at this person. Such a handsome appearance, such a strong ability, such a good background. He was simply a good man. Such a man was hard to find even with a lantern in hand. It was no wonder that the women of this continent flocked to him. It was a pity that although this good man had once been engaged to her and should have brought her great glory, he had only brought her a great disaster. This showed that she and he were not fated to be together, so there was nothing to regret about breaking off the engagement with him. Moreover, looking at this scene, this person would most likely be her future brother-in-law. She didn't want any rumors about her and her brother-in-law to be gossiped about. Therefore, she should stay away from him in the future and avoid seeing him if possible. Looking at him sleeping soundly on her lap, she suddenly felt that this position was not good. After thinking for a while, she carefully placed his head on the fox fur cloak. She got up and broke some soft branches nearby, mixed them with some soft grass, and began to weave something. When Rongyu Etalan woke up, it was almost noon. When he opened his eyes, he found himself lying on the fox fur cloak with a woven straw pillow under his head. There was also a faint smell of grass. The shade above his head was like a cover, blocking the sunlight. His gaze fell on a big tree not far away. Ji Shunyu was sitting on a rock, leaning against the big tree with her eyes closed and breathing evenly. She had fallen asleep. The sunlight sifted through the branches and leaves scattered on her body, making her beautiful face half bright and half dark. She looked very peaceful and quiet. Rongyu Atanlan slowly got up and hugged his knees as he looked at her sitting there sleeping. Then he looked at the straw pillow. It was as if something soft was slowly melting in his heart. It was inexplicably sweet and a little sour. When he left the Fanine continent, she was still a baby in swaddling clothes. Now, she had grown into such a beautiful and carefree girl. He didn't know why, but every time he saw her, he felt an inexplicable heartache and couldn't help but want to treat her well. This feeling made him confused. After thinking for a long time, he finally thought of a reason. He was probably feeling guilty towards her, right? After all, she was the only girl who had been cheated so miserably by him. Although he never liked to meddle in girls' business, he always wanted to meddle in her business. Especially when it came to her marriage, he was extremely worried. He was afraid that she would be coaxed by some lecher who was not worthy of her. Such a good girl should be matched with the best man and be cherished the best. And in his heart, he had yet to discover the best man. Don't worry, there's no hurry. In any case, they were immortal and had plenty of time to slowly search for them. Rongyu Tianlan realized that he really had a lot to worry about, but who asked him to feel guilty in his heart? No matter how much he worried, he was willing to do so. He saw that she was sleeping uncomfortably against the tree, her head nodding from time to time. After thinking for a while, he walked over and gently picked her up. Her body was very light. A cultivator's body was light to begin with, so in his arms, she was as light as a feather. Her soft and fragrant body lay firmly in his arms, making him somewhat reluctant to let go. However, his injuries hadn't healed yet. After holding her for a little longer, his forehead broke out in cold sweat. He didn't know what he tripped over, but he staggered and almost threw the person in his arms out. Chapter 2772. He placed her on the large cloak made of fire fox fur. After doing all this, he felt a little weak, so he sat down as well. Ji Shen was really too sleepy. She slept for a long time, and more importantly, she slept very soundly and did not have a single dream. Only when she was half asleep, she seemed to hear a low sigh in her ear. "Why aren't you her?" At that time, she was still in a daze and thought about it unwillingly. She was her, and never anyone else. Why did she have to be her? Of course, this was just a thought in her sleep. When she woke up, she did not remember it all. By the time she woke up after a good night's sleep, the sun was already in the west, and the sky was dyed red with the rosy clouds. When she opened her eyes, her body froze. She remembered that she had leaned against the tree and wanted to take a nap, but in the end, she fell asleep. It did not matter if she fell asleep, but why was she in someone's arms when she woke up? He was lying on his side beside her, and her head was lying in the crook of his arm. His other hand was holding a book, and his wide sleeves were hanging down, swaying in front of her eyes. What? What was going on? Ji Shen blinked her eyes. When she was in a deep sleep, she would be slow for a moment after waking up, and then she would be energetic again. Therefore, her brain was still sluggish, and she could not react for a while. "You're awake?" The sleeve in front of her eyes was removed, and she saw his handsome face above her, looking at her with a smile. Ji Shen nodded blankly. Yes. She turned her head in shock and was a little confused. It was rare to see her like this. At least Rongyue Tanlan had not seen it before. Rongyue Tanlan admired her expression for a moment and then said leisurely, "Since you're awake, then get up. My arm is numb from your pillow." Ji Shen jumped up immediately. She jumped too quickly and almost hit his tall nose. Rongyue Tanlan also sat up. "Why are you so flustered?" Ji Shen looked at the tree she had been leaning against to rest, and then looked at his leisurely face. "Why would I be? Of course I was the one who carried you here. You didn't sleep well there and kept snoring, which disturbed me." Ji Shen's face was as red as a tomato. "I don't snore." She then added, "I never snore when I sleep." Rongyue Tianlan chuckled. "That's why I said you didn't sleep well there. You were probably snoring because you were hugging your neck." Since Ji Shenhue didn't know that he had fallen asleep, she naturally didn't have any evidence to prove that he didn't snore. She choked and couldn't help but say, "Let's just say I was hugging your neck at that time. But it's enough that you put me on this fox fur cloak. Then why did you let me rest on your arm?" In her impression, between the opposite sex, it seemed that only husband and wife would sleep in such an intimate position. Rangi Yuishinlin raised her eyebrows. "If I don't let you sleep on my arm, don't tell me I'll let you sleep on my stomach?" Ji Shenyu. She choked. Rongyue Tanlan said slowly, "After you fell asleep, you kept snuggling into my arms, crying for hugs, and even put your head on my stomach. I weighed the pros and cons, and felt that it was better to let you rest on my arm than on my stomach. So, although Ji Shen didn't know what his sleeping posture was like, he had another choice." Chapter 2773. She gritted her teeth and reminded him, "Your Highness, I think you can let me lie on this fox fur cloak alone. That way I won't pester you." Rangi Yuishinlin raised his eyebrows. "If you lie on it alone, where do you want me to lie? I can't possibly stand aside just to let you rest, right? After all, my injuries haven't healed. I can't stand for long. But I remember that you have a white fox cloak. You can lie on it." Ji Shanhue was not easy to fool. Rangi Yuishinlin crossed his arms. "You want me to spoil the red fox fur, then spoil the white fox fur? How is it spoiling? Just lying down." Ji Shanhue did not understand Rangi Yuishinlin's thoughts. "I can't use spells here, so I can't use the cleaning spell. Once the white fox fur is spread on the ground, it will soon be stained. You know, I've always cherished things. These two fox furs are my favorite." Rangi Yuishinlin looked at the red fox fur under him with a pained expression. "Look, the fur on it is already dirty." As he spoke, he used his finger to lightly flick the fox fur. Ji Shanhue, she thought about it and felt that she would probably be with him for a few more days. So she had to remind him of some things. "Your Highness, I think that although we are engaged, we are about to break off the engagement. In the future, we will be nothing. We still have to guard against men and women." "Nothing?" Rangi Yuishinlin raised his eyebrows and looked at her for a moment, then pondered for a while. Are we not even friends? Ji Xinyue. She thought for a moment and felt that he had been quite loyal throughout the journey. Before she went to bed, she was still thinking that she could treat him as a friend in the future. At this time, she naturally couldn't deny it, so she nodded. Of course we're friends. She then added sincerely, Actually, I already treat you as a friend. Rong Yuishenlin held his chin and looked at her for a moment. A friend like Tianhen? Ji Xinhua thought about it and nodded reluctantly, something like that. She had gone through trials and tribulations with him, and he had even saved her life several times, so it was not bad for her to treat him as a friend. It was just that she always felt that her feelings towards him were not the same as her feelings towards Rong Yushenhang, but she could not remember what exactly was different. It was probably because the two of them had different personalities that she treated them differently. However, they were friends who had gone through life and death together. Rong Yuetian stood up from the red fox skin. It turned out that after spending so much time and effort, he was only at the same level as Rong Yu Tian Huan in her heart. It was even a little forced. Her Highness Rong Yu, who had always been incomparably gentle and elegant, and who boasted that she was very popular among women, was somewhat hurt. She lowered her head and casually put away the red fox pelt on the ground. She didn't even look at it before putting it into her storage space. When he raised his head, he saw Ji Shunyu looking at him, as if she wanted to say something. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be that his position in her heart was higher? She was too embarrassed to say it. He paused and looked at her gently, encouraging her gently. Do you have something to say to me? Ji Shunyu finally said, I saw a few beetles and geckos crawling onto your red fox skin. You rolled them up and stuffed them into your storage space. Rong Yuishenlin, moonlight sifted through the leaves of the trees overhead. There was a big fire under the tree. 2 wild boar legs were roasting on the fire, golden and tempting. Chapter 2774. Ji Shunyue was the one who caught the wild boar, and Rong Yuishenlin was the one who started the fire. Ji Shunyue was in charge of killing the boar, and Rong Yuishenlin was in charge of roasting the boar. The two of them worked together, and according to Rong Yuishenlin, neither of them was at a disadvantage. However, Ji Shunyue felt that she was at a disadvantage because she was doing all the hard work. Whether it was catching or killing the boar, shouldn't it be done by a man? Shouldn't a woman just sit there and wait to eat? Of course, she had always been fair and just. Even if she was a woman, she didn't want to be a freeloader. However, if she were to work with him, shouldn't she be the one to start the fire and roast the meat? Rong Yudanlan looked at her and patted her shoulder earnestly. Brother Ji, your statement is directed at the relationship between a man and a woman. When a man sees the woman beside him as a woman who needs to be protected, then your statement is valid. However, we are brothers, friends who have gone through life and death together. How can there be such a clear distinction between brothers and friends? Naturally, whoever has the strength will do the hard work. My injuries haven't healed yet, so hunting is a little difficult. Naturally, I'll leave this to you. As for killing the boar, actually, since we're friends, I can tell you a secret. I have a phobia of blood. I don't usually kill. Ji Shunyue was speechless by his twisted logic. After a while, she said, You don't kill? Then why do you eat meat? I clearly gave you some dry food just now. The two of them had been busy for 2 days and slept for a long time. In fact, they were both hungry. Ji Shunyue had prepared some dry food, and just now, she wanted to share it with him as a friend. However, this guy directly stuffed her dry food back into the storage space and then asked her to go hunting. Rong Yuishenlin fanned the fire with his folding fan while answering slowly, I have injuries on my body. I can only recover quickly by eating meat, so I have no choice. Finally, the 2 roasted pig legs were ready. He handed one to her. Here, try my cooking. Ji Shunyue took a bite and her eyes lit up. Good meat. Rong Yuishenlin waved his folding fan proudly. I roasted it. Ji Shunyue gave him a thumbs up. The meat he roasted was 100 times better than hers. She never thought that roasting meat in the wild could be so delicious. She had been roasting for so many years, but she had never been able to reach such a standard. Do you want to learn? If you want to learn, I can teach you. Rong Yuetian said. Sure. Rong Yuishanlin seemed to have thought of something. This is a secret technique of mine. If you want to learn it, you need to acknowledge a master. Becoming a disciple just to learn how to roast meat? Ji Shun, you didn't buy it. Then forget it. She had promised her master that she would only worship him as her master in this lifetime. Rong Yuetian didn't expect her to reject him so straightforwardly. He thought for a while and said, If you become my disciple, I can teach you some other things. He knew all kinds of things, and many of them were top-notch. He really lacked a successor. For some reason, he had the idea of taking Ji Shunyu as his disciple. However, Ji Shunyu's pretty face darkened slightly. Not interested. Was he afraid that she would regret it and refuse to dissolve their marriage? He wanted to use the method of becoming her disciple to completely cut off her thoughts of him. She had no interest in him at all. All right? He was thinking too much. Apprenticeship? If she worshipped him as her master, then after he and Ji Tianyue got married, wouldn't her sister be her master's wife? Chapter 2775. That's not a joke. Rong Yue Tianlan didn't understand what she was thinking. Hearing her firm refusal, his heart sank, but he refused to give up. Why did you refuse? I'm actually a very good master. I don't know how many people want to be my disciple, but I didn't agree. He thought for a while and asked, Are you afraid that Ziyun's sex overlord won't agree? I'm not really fighting with him for a disciple. I'm just teaching you some other skills. It won't conflict with what he teaches. Before he could finish, he was interrupted by Ji Xinyue again. You don't have to worry about this anymore. I'll only have one master in my life, and there won't be a second one. Rong Yue Tianlan's heart suddenly sank. He vaguely remembered that when Shun Juli took Ning Xiuma as his disciple, he also said that he wouldn't take any other female disciples in the future and would let Ning Xiuma be his only one. Therefore, in Rong Yue Tianlan's mind, this sentence was actually a symbol of a master-disciple relationship. Now that he suddenly heard Ji Shunyue say this, his heart felt like it was being squeezed by something. He frowned subconsciously. Did you and your master promise this? In the Sanskrit continent, it was not against a disciple having more than one master. Ji Shunyue's behavior was actually a little strange. He suddenly remembered that Ji Shunyue had said that she already had a sweetheart. Could it be that her sweetheart was her master, Ziyun's sex overlord? Ji Shunyue didn't want to be entangled with him on this topic, so she casually replied, Yes, yes. She looked up at the sky and suddenly jumped up. It's too late. We have to hurry. After putting out the fire, she jumped up to the treetops and ran forward. After running for a while, she suddenly realized that something was wrong. She turned her head and saw that Rong Yue Tianlan didn't follow her. What was going on? She ran back again. Fortunately, she didn't run far and soon found Rong Yue Tianlan, who was putting out the fire. She rubbed her eyebrows. She had forgotten about this. Starting a fire in the forest required the fire to be completely extinguished, otherwise it might cause a forest fire. Burn this sacred mountain. She helped to extinguish the fire and said, Let's go. It's faster to fly on the treetops. Rong Yuetian shook her head. My power has yet to recover, so I can't fly. I can only walk on the ground. His injuries were actually this serious? Remembering that she was also responsible for his injuries, Ji Shinyu felt guilty. He was so heavily injured that he couldn't even use his qigong, so she naturally couldn't leave him alone. Otherwise, what would she do if he was dragged by some monster? She raised her head and looked at the top of the mountain. It was still far away. If he used qigong to run, he could probably reach there in one night. However, if he had to cut his way through the thistles and thorns below, they would probably have to walk for another 2 days. Rong Yuetian looked at her tightly knitted brows. Are you in a hurry? We have to get to the Pillar of Marriage early tomorrow morning. If we don't use qigong, we won't be able to get there. Ji Shinyu explained to him. Rong Yuetian crossed his arms and looked at her. He was even more puzzled than she was. Why must we arrive early tomorrow morning? When I left you the letter, I wrote that we'll meet at the Pillar of Marriage on time tomorrow. I can't break the promise. Ji Shinyu replied. Rong Yuetian raised his eyebrows even higher. Haven't we always been together? Even if we can't get to the pillar of marriage tomorrow, it won't be considered breaking the promise, right? Chapter 2776. But, but I've already told my master that I'll leave the mountain on time to meet him the day after tomorrow. If she couldn't reach the marriage pillar by tomorrow, then all the promises would have to be postponed. It turned out that the reason why she was so anxious was because she wanted to see her master. Rong Yuishenlin stopped talking. Ji Shanyue suddenly grabbed his arm. Let me take you away. We can't delay any longer. Without any explanation, she flew up with him. Rong Yuishenlin glanced at her and simply pressed his whole body on her, not using any strength. In this way, his body was as heavy as an ordinary person's. Ji Shanyue carried him as if she was dragging a bag with a large rock. It was slightly difficult. After running like this for about an hour, Ji Shanyue couldn't take it anymore and fell directly to the ground. She was too anxious when she landed and even staggered, almost slamming Rong Yuishenlin into a tree. The mountain slope here was very steep, almost 80 degrees, almost vertical. Ji Shanyue stood with the support of a big tree, panting slightly. She raised her hand to wipe the sweat on her forehead and pointed forward. We just need to go over this mountain, and we can see the mountain with the marriage pillar. Rong Yuishenlin leaned against the big tree and stood. Looks like you're not completely ignorant about this mountain. Ji Shanyue said, Of course, I've been inquiring about this mountain for a few years. I never fight an unprepared battle. Rong Yuishenlin opened and closed the fan in his hand once in boredom. His tone was also calm. A few years ago, when I was still in another continent, you were already thinking about breaking off the engagement with me? Ji Shinyu answered matter-of-factly. That's right. Even though I know the chances of you coming back aren't high, I still have to make preparations, just in case you suddenly come back. I don't want to make a last-minute strategy. Reality proved that her preparations were very wise, and the strategy was not made in vain. Rong Yuishenlin looked at her without saying anything. Ji Xingyue was a little confused by his gaze. Weren't you also in a hurry to break off the engagement as soon as you came back? We hit it off right away. Rong Yuishenlin closed his eyes slightly and leaned against the tree. He came back in a hurry to break off the engagement because of that shadow in his heart. Then was she in a hurry to break off the engagement also because she had someone in her heart? You like your master? In the end, Rong Yuishenlin still asked the question. She muttered to herself for a moment, as if she was considering her words carefully. I feel that his age is a little on the older side. If she remembered correctly, the Grand Master of Ziyin should be more than 7,000 years old. No matter how pretty he was still twice as old as Ji Shunyu. Ji Shunyu did not pay attention to the first part of his sentence, but was angered by Rong Yue Tianlan's last sentence. My master is only 7,200 years old. How is it big? There are so many people on this continent who are older than him. Her master, Grandmaster Ziyin, had a problem that only the people of his sect knew about. He hated it the most when people said that he was old. If anyone dared to say that, he would immediately turn hostile. Ji Shunyu remembered that when she was learning under his tutelage, she had unintentionally said, Master, you're my esteemed master. It was supposed to be an honorific, but in the end, she was directly punished by sect masters Yun to kneel on the steps and bask in the moonlight for an entire night. At that time, she was still feeling very wronged. She did not know what she had said wrong. Luckily, her eldest senior brother Feng Buji had given her instructions. Only then did she realize that she had violated her master's taboo. After that, she was never punished for the same reason again. It had already become a habit for her to worry about this. Chapter 2777. It had become a habit for her to worry about this. Now that she suddenly heard Rong Yue Tianlan talking about her master's age, she couldn't help but refute him fiercely. Rong Yue Tianlan's heart sank when he heard her strong refutation. He was even more certain that his guess was correct. She liked her master. After refuting, Ji Shenyue didn't forget to remind him, You can't say that my master is old in the future. You can't. Ron Yue, Tianlan's expression didn't look too good. He was about to say something when Ji Xunyue looked up and suddenly discovered something. She shouted happily, "Lu Yuan bead! It's the Lu Yuan bead!" She jumped up and was about to fly up. Ron Yue Tianlan reacted quickly and grabbed her. "What are you doing?" Ji Xunyue pointed to a faint blue dot on a fan cliff not far away. "There's a Lu Yuan bead there. My master has been wanting this for a long time. I'll go pick it and give it to him. He'll be very happy." Recently, because of her annulment, her master, sect leader Ziyun, had been worried about her. He was anxious and angry that she didn't listen to him. He had always been indifferent to her and even went into seclusion in anger. She heard from her senior brother that her master would come out of seclusion in 10 days. She had originally planned to welcome her master out of seclusion after the annulment. The timing was just right. Seeing how filial she was, her master probably wouldn't blame her anymore. Every time her master came out of seclusion, as his disciples, they had to prepare small gifts. Ji Xunyue was worried about what gift to prepare for her master, who had always been picky. Now that she found this, she suddenly felt as if she had found a treasure. The Lu Yuan bead was actually an extremely hard, petrified bead. Legend had it that if one was fated, one could see through it and comprehend the mortal world. Wearing it on one's forehead could protect one from all kinds of evil and poison. It was really a good treasure that could be used to show off and was also useful. It could even be eaten. Eating it could cure all the poisons in the world. Of course, no one was willing to eat it. Usually, those who got it would treat it as a family heirloom and pass it down from generation to generation. Sect leader Ziyun once said in front of his disciples that he hadn't seen what the Lu Yuan bead looked like in his life. If he saw the bead, he might be able to comprehend life and break free from the mortal world, thus entering the realm of immortals. In this life, because Ji Xunyue was not cared about by many people, there were not many people she cared about. Once she cared about someone, she would give her all to that person. Therefore, even though she often angered her master to the point of having a stroke because of her disobedience, she still took her master's words to heart. She also looked up a lot of information about the fate bead and learned about its characteristics and origin. She also firmly remembered it in her heart. The pearls of fate could only be found in the Misty Mountain, and their production could no longer be described as simply scarce. They could only be found by chance and not sought. This time, Ji Xunyue came to the Misty Mountain range with the intention of trying to find it. Therefore, she had been paying attention to her surroundings along the way. She didn't expect that she would be so lucky as to find one here. Naturally, she wouldn't let it go. As she spoke, she had already begun to adjust her sleeves. Ron Yue Tianlan also looked in the direction she was pointing at. He was also experienced and knowledgeable, so he knew that Ji Xunyue was not mistaken. That was indeed the pearl of fate, but you can't pick that pearl. Rong Guishanlin stopped her as she was about to fly up. Why? Ji Xunyue was surprised. Do you know how fate beads are formed? Ji Xunyue looked at him blankly. Chapter 2778. Ji Xunyue looked at him blankly. She felt that as long as she knew the function of the fate bead, she didn't care how it was formed. The fate bead is formed by the wraiths who entered this mountain and died here. The stronger the wraiths' resentment, the stronger their skills when they were alive, and the purer the fate bead formed, the better. The wraiths who could form the fate bead were all above the monarch god level when they were alive. Therefore, even after thousands of years of purification by the special spiritual chi of Misty Mountain, the resentment will not disappear. Instead, it will adhere to the surface of the bead. Once it is extracted, it will alarm the wraiths above and cause big trouble. This bead is the best of the fate beads. It should be the king's bead. Not only are there wraiths above the king's bead that are close to the level of the mighty deity, there will also be some small wraiths that protect the king. Once you provoke it, it will be no different from you poking a hornet's nest naked. Rong Yuishanlin's tone was indifferent as he began to educate her. The last analogy was a little rough and not like his style, but it was very vivid. However, Ji Xunyue had always been a person who refused to admit defeat and was full of adventurous spirit. There was nothing she couldn't get if she wanted to. Rong Yuishinlin's somewhat threatening explanation didn't scare her off. She still wanted to pick the bead. After listening to Rong Yuishinlin's words, she was prepared. She took out the scroll that third young Master Qi gave her from her sleeve. It's okay, I have this. I will hide here after I pick the bead. Those wraiths may not be able to find me. Okay, I'm going. She held the knife in her left hand and was about to go up directly. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and turned to look at Rong Yuishinlin. If those wraiths can't find me, will they vent their anger on you? Why don't you hide away first? Those wraiths are also responsible for every grievance. They probably won't hurt an innocent like you. In the night, Rong Yuishinlin's expression was not good. The scroll may not be able to stop the wraiths. What if they follow you in? I'm afraid you won't be able to use it in the world of the scroll. These wraiths may entangle you and turn you into a wraiths. You won't be able to get out and become one of the wraiths here. Is it worth it for a decorative bead? It's worth it. Ji Shunyu had already tidied herself up. She only threw 2 words at Rongyue Tianlan before flying straight towards the fan cliff. How much did she love her master that she would risk her life to help him pick a useless bead? Rongyue Tianlan saw her dashing towards the fan cliff like an ape and felt that she was a little unsettled. Anger swirled in his chest, and he clenched the fan in his hand. Although Ji Shunyu had already mentally prepared herself because of Rong Yuishinlin's words, when she hovered in the air above the cliff and used a treasured knife to pry out a blue pearl embedded in a piece of granite, the swarm of resentful spirits still gave her a fright. Countless blood-red wraiths shot out in all directions, as if they had exploded. There were thousands of them. They screamed and rushed toward her. If there were a dozen, or even 40 or 50 of them, she could try to fight them. But a few thousand, how was this poking a hornet's nest? This was clearly poking a nest of wraiths. Not to mention fighting. Even if these wraiths surrounded her and spat at her, they could drown her. Ji Shunyu decisively turned and ran. She ran as fast as lightning, and those wraiths chased after her like maggots attached to bones. After all, she was only using lightness skill. There was no way she could outrun these wraiths. Chapter 2779. After all, she was only using lightness skill and could not use her spiritual force to create a protective enchantment. She could not use her spiritual force to travel 1,000 miles in an instant. No matter how fast she ran, she could only run at the speed of a human at her peak. However, these wraiths were obviously not restricted by these restrictions. Not only were they fast, but they also used various spells in the process. Countless stones, sharp knives, poisonous needles, lightning attacked Ji Shunyu intensely. If not for Ji Shunyue's nimble body and experienced swordsmanship, as well as the fact that her sword was a magic weapon that could slightly restrain those wraiths, she would have been entangled by those wraiths and turned into a skeleton. She quickly realized that running like this could not get rid of these wraiths. It seemed that she could only use that scroll. She forced back 2 wraiths that almost bit her arm with her sword. Just as she was about to pull out the scroll, she looked down and saw a large group of wraiths rushing in one direction from afar. Her heart skipped a beat. That was the direction where Rongyue Tianlan was standing. When she was running just now, she was afraid that she would implicate Rongyue Tianlan, so she deliberately ran in the opposite direction. She did not expect these wraiths to be linked together. She was the one who provoked them, but they actually attacked an innocent passerby. Rongyue Tianlan was still injured and could not use her lightness skill. If she was surrounded by those wraiths, Ji Shunyue's heart almost sank into the abyss. She turned her body abruptly and rushed in that direction with all her might. Ji Shunyu felt that she had never used lightness skill to run so fast in her life. She actually crashed into those wraiths just as they were about to surround Rongyue Tianlan. Rongyue Tianlan's long sword had just been drawn when he saw her shooting over like a cannonball, almost hitting the tip of his sword. He lowered his sword in time, but Ji Shunyu had already grabbed his arm and shouted, "Let's go." She pulled him up to the treetops. Those wraiths could not tolerate the fat meat in their mouths being snatched away just like that. They gathered together with the wraiths that were chasing Ji Shangyue and pounced on the two of them from all directions. Ji Shangyue glanced around and saw that as far as her eyes could see, it was densely packed with skulls shining with red light. Her scalp went numb. She pulled open the scroll. The scroll swayed in the wind. It was still a scroll. It did not suck the two of them in, as Ji Shangyue expected. And what was going on? Could it be that entering this scroll required some kind of incantation? Third young Master Qi was such an idiot. He gave her this map of the universe, but didn't tell her how to enter the map of the universe. Rong Yuetian looked at the scroll shaking in her palm, then looked at her. What's wrong? Ji Shangyue scowled miserably. I don't know the incantation. The corner of Rong Yuetian's lips twitched slightly. She raised her hand and grabbed the map of the universe. Her palm pressed against the mountains and rivers in the map. The world was spinning. The world seemed to have become a spinning kaleidoscope. Ji Shanyu felt as if she had fallen into a madly spinning cylinder, and for a moment, she couldn't tell what was going on. Ji Shangyue was most afraid of this kind of situation where she couldn't reach the sky and couldn't reach the ground. She subconsciously curled up. Amidst the chaos, she felt as if she had rolled into an embrace. There was a faint plum fragrance in that embrace that made her feel peaceful for no reason. Don't be afraid. His voice was gentle, as if he was comforting her. We've entered the scroll of the universe. Ji Shanyu felt as if something had struck her heart. In this world, she had always been alone. No matter what kind of danger she encountered, she had to face it herself. Chapter 2780. Even if she had companions, those companions relied on her. When they were in danger, they needed her to save them. Therefore, no one had ever protected her in their arms and told her not to be afraid when she was in danger. This was the first time. A strange feeling suddenly welled up in her heart. It felt warm, wronged, and bitter at the same time. Of course, this feeling was fleeting. It was so fast that she almost couldn't feel it before it disappeared without a trace. After a while, Ji Shangyue felt her feet stop, and she finally stepped on solid ground. After she breathed a sigh of relief, she realized that she was still in Rong Yuetian's arms. His arms were tightly wrapped around her waist, holding her tightly. Her face was pressed against his chin, and their posture was unusually intimate. Her face heated up, and she raised her hand to push him away. She took a step back and suddenly staggered, leaning against a rock. What's wrong? Rong Yuetian realized that something was wrong with her and quickly looked her up and down. Finally, his gaze fell on her leg. He frowned and asked, What's wrong with your leg? Ji Shangyue leaned against the rock, her forehead covered in sweat. One of her legs was propped up on the ground, and the other was half lifted. It looked a little twisted. Her face was pale from the pain, but her expression was calm. It's nothing. I hit a rock when I was running away just now. It's a small injury. I'll treat it now. As she spoke, she held her knife tightly and looked around to make sure that there were no resentful spirits following them. Rong Yuetian saw blood seeping out from her trousers and staining her light green skirt, like a flower blooming in the shade. Rong Yuetian suddenly took a step forward, grabbed her arm, and put her directly on a big rock. Ji Shangyue was shocked. She didn't expect him to have such strength now. She was stunned for a moment and wanted to get up. What are you doing? Let me see your injury. Don't forget, I'm a doctor. Rong Yuetian held her injured calf. Ji Shangyue frowned slightly. In her heart, there was still a barrier between men and women. She didn't want him to see her leg again and again. Moreover, it wasn't her calf that was injured this time, but the area above her knee. She turned over and was about to sit up. I said, it's a small injury. I can treat it myself. Before she could finish her sentence, Rong Yuetian tightened her grip on her calf. He only made a very light movement, but her body stiffened and her charming face paled. Her leg was broken. The pain of a broken bone was bone-piercing. Normal people would not be able to endure it. Even a 7-foot-tall man would howl and groan endlessly when his leg was broken like this. But she didn't make a sound, dragging her injured leg and running for so long. She even came to save him. He raised his head and looked at her sweaty face. His voice was cold. Is a broken leg a minor injury? Then wouldn't it be considered a serious injury if the leg was sent flying? Ji Xinhua paused for a moment, thinking that he was making a mountain out of a molehill. If it's broken, I'll just reattach it. I'm pretty good at setting bones. Her tone was very casual. Obviously, this kind of injury was nothing to her. Rong Yuetian looked at her with a deep gaze. Then, are you in pain? Ji Xinhua was stunned. Of course it hurts, but so what if it hurts? No matter how painful it was, she had to endure it. She still had to do what she had to do. Rong Yuetian heaved a sigh of relief. I'll set your bones. If it hurts, just scream. Don't endure it. Ji Xinhua was speechless. Was it useful to scream? It would still hurt. If she screamed, other than being laughed at, there was nothing else. Chapter 2781. When she was young, no matter how painful it was when she fell, she would get up and rub it herself. No one would comfort her. When she grew up, no matter how serious her injuries were, as long as she could get up, she would grit her teeth and treat it herself. No matter how painful it was, she could only endure it. This nurtured her character of relying on herself for everything. She would also be in pain, but she was used to enduring it. She looked at him with wide eyes and pursed her lips slightly. She was still not used to being taken care of. Rong Yuetianlan raised her head and met her pair of big, clear eyes. His heart seemed to have been hit hard by something. After thinking for a while, he took out a flat jade bone from his sleeve and handed it to her. Bite this. Ji Xinhua naturally knew what this jade bone was for. It was to prevent her from biting her tongue if she was in too much pain. But she would not make such a low-level mistake. She just needed to endure it for a while, and it would be over. So she shook her head. No need. Just do it. I can take it. Rong Yuetianlan was speechless. What kind of pain did this girl suffer in the past? He suddenly became angry. You're still a girl. In front of me, you don't need to be so strong. If it hurts, just shout it out. No one will laugh at you even if you cry. Ji Xinhua blinked. She actually did not understand why Rong Yuetianlan was angry. But since he said so, she strangely felt like listening to him. She nodded. Okay. Rong Yuetianlan's movements were extraordinarily swift. Ji Xinhua did not see his movements at all. He just held her calf and shook it like lightning. Crack! With a soft sound, the broken bone was connected. The pain of connecting a bone was no less than that of breaking a bone. If it was another girl, she would have been in so much pain that her face would have been full of tears. However, Ji Xinhua's body only stiffened slightly. Her face turned pale, but she did not move at all. Rong Yuetianlan glanced at her. She seemed to have realized something. She opened her mouth and let out a soft "ah." That sound was like a kitten's meow, very soft. If one did not listen carefully, one would not be able to hear it. Rong Yuetianlan was speechless. He actually suspected that her pain nerves were not as sensitive as before. His gaze fell on her forehead. It was covered with pearl-like beads of sweat. Obviously, she was in pain. However, she had suffered alone for so long that she had long forgotten what it felt like to cry out in pain. Her heart seemed to have been pricked by something. Rong Yuetianlan looked at her and was speechless for a moment. Ji Xinhua let out a sigh of relief. She noticed that he was looking at her with a strange gaze, as if something was floating in the depths of his eyes. His gaze made her heart skip a beat, but she didn't know what to do. After thinking for a while, he finally remembered that he had asked her to cry out in pain, but she didn't. So he didn't feel any sense of accomplishment. The way he set the bones was actually much gentler than when she did herself. Naturally, the pain was also less than before. Therefore, she felt that she needed to explain. Well, it's not that I don't want to scream, but it really doesn't hurt that much. It's much less painful than I thought. Your technique is very good, better than mine. While explaining, she didn't forget to praise him. After all, what she said was the truth. Rong Yuetianlan didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her explanation. She couldn't help but raise her hand and rub her head. What a strong girl. After reconnecting the broken bone, it was time to treat the wound on her leg. However, Ji Shunyu didn't want him to handle it anymore, insisting that she could handle herself. Chapter 2782. Rong Yu Tianlan also felt that it was inappropriate to look at a lady's thigh. Last time, it was an emergency, but this time, there was no need to insist. No matter how severe the external injuries were, they could not be too severe. So he took out the medicine and handed it to her, letting her do it herself. He was still a gentleman, standing up and saying, "You do it yourself here, I'll go over there and take a look." He was pointing at a lush forest. This was inside the scroll of the universe. The mountains were warm, the water was soft, the weather was mild, and the sun was warm. It was a good place to recuperate. There were only the two of them here. The wraiths did not follow them in. So Rong Yu Tianlan was relieved. After reminding her of a few things to take note of, he got up and walked into the forest. Since he had already gone far away, Ji Shunyu dared to take off her pants. She took off her pants to treat her injuries. In order to make it easier for her to fight, she wore slightly tighter pants. She could not roll them up, so she could only take them off or tear them. However, the fabric was unusually strong, so tearing it was a bit troublesome. She still had to save her strength for the rest of the journey, so she saved as much energy as she could. She simply took off her pants and pulled them down her knees. She half sat there and checker-wound. The wound was a little big and deep. Although she had sealed her acupoints to stop the bleeding, it still looked a little scary. In the deepest part, she could faintly see the white bone in the flesh. No wonder it hurt so much. She had not expected to hit it so hard. No wonder it hurt so much. The wound needed to be cleaned and disinfected. She took out a gourd of wine. The wine had a strong disinfection effect, but it hurt a little when she poured it on the wound. She gritted her teeth and was about to pour it up when she suddenly looked up and saw a bright blue bucket not far away. There were words on the bucket, "Use it to disinfect." The words were written in a flamboyant style. It was Rong Yu Tianlan's handwriting. It seemed that he was very considerate of her. Ji Shunyu was rarely taken care of like this, and her heart warmed slightly. She carried the bucket over. The bucket was half filled with some unknown medicinal liquid. When Ji Shunyu used it to clean her wound, not only did it not worsen the pain, but it also made her wound feel cool and the pain lessen a lot. As expected of an authentic doctor, he was completely different from a half-baked doctor like her, who had come from an unorthodox way. She had treated many wounds for herself in her life, so she was naturally skilled. However, she was only skilled and could not be considered professional. In addition, she didn't care much about her body. So when she treated the wound, she would stop the bleeding, apply medicine, tie the bandages, and wait for it to heal by itself. Fortunately, her body had a good foundation. No matter how serious her injuries were, they would heal after her treatment. Other than the deep and shallow scars, there were no other side effects. She looked at the big bloody wound on her leg. If there were no accidents, there would be a scar here too. She then looked at the other scars on her legs. For the first time, she felt that they were actually an eyesore. For someone with trypophobia like her, the feeling was a bit frightening. Even she had goosebumps when she saw it, let alone others. In fact, other than her pretty face, her body was really terrible. If she really got married, her groom would probably have nightmares and run away when he saw her injuries. If he managed to catch up with someone with a better temper, perhaps he would just marry a few concubines to comfort him. Chapter 2783. If she met someone with a bad temper, he might just throw her a letter of divorce and point at the door, telling her to scram as far away as she could. Of course, with her temper and methods, it was highly likely that her cheap husband would be the one to scram. But thinking about it still made her feel sad. Fortunately, she didn't plan to marry again, so she didn't have to hate her future husband so ugly. Suddenly, a comment came from behind her. The voice was as cold as the cold wind from Siberia. Ji Shunyu was shocked. Her body instinctively bounced up, but just as she bounced halfway, she heard a chi sound and quickly fell back down, desperately tugging at her skirt. Her pants, which were originally pulled down her knees, were completely torn in half by her sudden bouncing. At this moment, Half of her pants were hanging on one leg. Not only could it not cover anything, it even tripped her. Opposite her on a big rock sat a person, a man in white. In Ji Shun Yu's knowledge, men who wore white were generally good-looking, and were basically the type that looked like a handsome tree in the wind. For example, Rong Yu Tianlan. Although he was extremely handsome in a blue robe, Ji Shun Yu felt that if he wore a white robe, he would also be extremely handsome. But this man in white in front of her, Ji Shun Yu, felt a little strange. She even felt cold when she looked at him. If this man in white's facial features were to be separated, it could be said that every one of them was perfect and good-looking. Long and narrow phoenix eyes, a high-nosed bridge, bright red lips, a beautifully curved chin. Even his ears were like those of a gold ingot. If these facial features were to be put together, it should have been a peerless, handsome man. But on this man's face, it was indescribably strange. It made one's heart turn cold at a glance. Moreover, he had a head of long snow-white hair. That long hair draped over his body like satin, as if he had added a silk robe outside his long robe. Other than his black eyes, this man's entire body was snow-white, like a snowman carved out of ice and snow for 10,000 years. Where he was, the temperature dropped by more than 10 degrees. It was supposed to be spring here, but after he came out, it seemed to have entered a cold winter. There were even snowflakes floating in the sky. "Who are you?" Ji Shun Yu quietly took 2 steps back. She really wanted to take off her pants, but the person in front of her made her feel extremely dangerous, so she was on full alert and didn't dare to make any other movements. Could this person be a character from the scroll of the universe? Third young Master Qi shouldn't be so unreliable, right? He probably wouldn't give her a scroll that hid a great demon. Although this person was handsome, there was only one word written on his entire body: sinister. It was obvious that he was not a righteous person. Looking at his aura, he seemed to be some leader of the demonic path. In the Sanskrit continent, the righteous path was very prosperous. Various sects stood in great numbers while the demonic path had always been suppressed. It was said that they were hiding in some barren place and didn't dare to come out easily. Of course, because the place where the devil path was located was very dangerous, the people of the righteous path would not easily take the risk. The immortal Tao and the demonic Tao could be said to be in a subtle harmony. Ji Shun Yu had never seen a true demonic cultivator in her entire life. And now, she was very sure that she had met one. Little girl, guess who I am?" The voice of the man in white was very magnetic, but it sounded like the announcer in a news broadcast. There was no emotion, and it was very official. Chapter 2784. How would she know who he was? Ji Shun Yu hated this guessing game the most. When she met this kind of person, her usual method was to cut him down. She would cut him down until he told her who he was. She narrowed her eyes slightly, clenched the broadsword in her hand, and began to consider which angle would be faster. Actually, what she wanted to dig out the most was this person's eyes, because when he said those 2 sentences, he looked at her legs a few times. His gaze was as direct as a knife, as if he could see her naked legs through her skirt. It made Ji Shun Yu feel very uncomfortable. If she was wearing pants at this moment, she would have already flown over with her broadsword. But once she flew, her skirt would fly up, and she would definitely be exposed. Probably sensing Ji Shun Yu's unfriendly gaze, the man in white laughed. "Little girl, I advise you to be sensible and not do anything to me, or you will die miserably. And I don't want to kill you for now." He was clearly smiling, but his facial expression was very stiff, making people feel uncomfortable. Ji Shun Yu had already seen that this person's martial arts should be unfathomable. While thinking quickly, she dealt with him. "Who are you? How did you get in?" The man laughed deeply. "Little girl, you were the one who brought me in." He looked around and nodded with satisfaction. "This place is much better than the broken soul cliff outside. I like it." Ji Shun Yu suddenly understood. "You are the guardian vengeful spirit of Lu Yuan Bead." No wonder this person was so gloomy. It turned out that he was a vengeful spirit. Vengeful spirits usually had a translucent physical appearance, or even a skull, but she didn't expect that the one in front of her had already cultivated a human form. She couldn't tell at first glance. Guardian, vengeful spirit? The man lowered his eyes and whispered, then suddenly sneered. That bead is just a place for me to stay. I don't need to protect it. So, you are also a vengeful spirit who died in Misty Mountain? You died because of breaking off a marriage? This person must have been extremely powerful when he was alive to be able to transform into Lu Yuan Bead King. Such a powerful person actually died because of breaking off a marriage. This Misty Mountain was indeed a dangerous place. Ji Xinyu's words seemed to have touched this person's heart. He raised his head and laughed, but his eyes revealed a stern look. That's right, to die for breaking off the engagement. If you didn't mention it, I would have almost forgotten about that matter, about being betrayed by that slut. Beautiful women are all bad things. When he said the last sentence, he was almost gnashing his teeth. Ji Xinyue, this devil had suffered at the hands of beautiful women before, right? Have you ever been betrayed by your wife? She even plotted against you here? Ji Xinyu seemed to be a little curious as she asked. In fact, she wasn't curious at all. She only asked this to stall for time. Usually, when this kind of old monster was trapped in a place for a long time, they would have a desire to talk. Now that she had given him this opportunity, he would probably talk about it again. And she needed this short opportunity. She stealthily stepped on her trousers and slowly moved to the side. She had placed a pair of pants beside the boulder just now. As long as she wore it, she would be able to slash people without any scruples. The premise was that she had to get rid of this troublesome pair of pants on her body first. But her plan was wrong. She didn't arouse the other party's desire to talk, but instead seemed to have stepped on his sore spot. Chapter 2785. That person's face darkened, and his hand suddenly grabbed forward. Ji Xinyue had already retreated a zhang away, and one of her torn trousers had been kicked off by her. She was about to kick the second one. She was not prepared for this grab. This person's arm was very strange. When he grabbed over, his arm actually stretched out a zhang. By the time Ji Xinyue realized it, the arm was already in front of her. She was also a fast person. Her feet suddenly stopped, and she was about to flip backwards. But halfway through, she suddenly remembered that she was still naked. Her expression changed, and she cursed under her breath and could only lie back down. She was lying down in a sorry state, but fortunately, she managed to avoid this person's grab. After lying down, she immediately rolled 18 times on the ground, wanting to completely avoid that person's attack range. But that person's move was very strange. After grabbing empty air, his palms suddenly clenched, and a strong suction force pulled towards Ji Xinyue. Ji Xinyue could avoid the physical grab, but she could do nothing about this invisible suction force. Her body involuntarily rolled towards that person, and she could not even decide the position she should roll in. Under this kind of rolling, the problem of exposing herself naturally appeared. Her skirt was lifted up by the suction force from time to time, revealing her legs. That person's gaze fell on Ji Xinyue's legs, and his eyes burned with passion. His other hand made a gesture, and a gust of wind blew towards Ji Xinyue's skirt. That skirt seemed to be pulled up by a huge force, and was about to be completely exposed. This bastard was a peeping Tom. Ji Xinyue's expression changed greatly. She desperately tried to cover her skirt with both hands, but just as she touched her skirt, she heard a rip sound, and her skirt split from the middle. They were all exposed. Ji Xinyue panicked. In this kind of situation, it was useless for her to cover herself up. So, she decided not to cover herself up. A light flashed in her palm, and taking advantage of the violent rolling, she raised her broadsword and stabbed towards the white, clothed person's heart. She wanted to kill this bastard. This was the first time in her life that she had met such a peeping Tom. This person clearly looked like a human, but she did not expect him to be so wretched. That person's eyes flashed slightly, and with a pinch of his fingers, the tip of Ji Xinyue's broadsword was actually caught between his fingers. This kind of thunderous attack was easily countered by him. What a feisty little girl. I like it. There seemed to be ice in that person's palm. After Ji Shunyu's broadsword was grabbed by him, there was actually a line of ice that quickly spread along the broadsword. In the blink of an eye, Ji Shunyu's broadsword had turned into an ice blade. What was even worse was that the ice line came too quickly. Ji Shunyu's hand was frozen before she could pull it back. The ice line extended from her hand to her arm, and wherever it went, her blood vessels froze. The man held her broadsword in his left hand and touched her, but with his right hand. "Little girl, you have a pair of good legs. Your butt is not bad either. Pervert." Ji Shunyu's head exploded. She would rather die than suffer such humiliation. Her right hand was frozen, so she raised her left hand and smashed it towards her own temple. She was trying to commit suicide. The man's eyes flashed. The hand that was originally touching her buttocks grabbed her left wrist and looked at her. "Do you want to die?" Nonsense. If she didn't die, would she wait to be humiliated by him? Ji Shunyu pursed her lips and glared at him. "Then do you know that I am a vengeful spirit? If you die, you can accompany me as a vengeful spirit." Chapter 2786. That person's voice was cruel, as if he was determined to get her. Ji Shunyu's eyes narrowed slightly. She had forgotten about this. But in this misty mountain, she was restricted by the mountain rules and could not use her spiritual force. It was the same even in the scroll of the universe. However, once she died, her soul would not be restricted by this. She might be able to fight it out with this bastard and end up in a life and death struggle. Her right hand was stuck to the ice blade, and her left wrist was held by him. Other than her legs, she did not have any other attack weapons. She did not know what kind of evil martial arts this person practiced. Wherever he held, that place would be frozen. Ji Shunyu's arms were frozen, and she could only watch as the ice spread over her shoulders. That person looked at her, who was about to be frozen into an ice statue, and smiled. "Little girl, I will turn you into an ice statue. It will feel better to touch you that way." Her skills were not as good as his, and because of the rules, Ji Shunyu's heart was filled with grief and despair. In this place, there were only two people, Rongyue Tianlan and her. Rongyue Tianlan was still injured and could not use her lightness skill. How could she count on him to save her? Even if he came, he would just lose his life for nothing. She was about to use the stupidest way to die, which was to kill herself by biting her tongue. Suddenly, the sound of a flute could be heard from afar. With the sound of the flute, the surrounding air seemed to vibrate slightly. The vibration was very small, but it had the effect of changing the world. The place where Ji Shunyue was standing had turned into a world of ice and snow because of the appearance of the white-robed man. But with the sound of the flute, the surrounding snow melted at a speed visible to the naked eye, as if it had met the scorching sun. The ice that was spreading towards Ji Shunyu's arms suddenly stopped and began to slowly fade away. At the same time, with the continuous sound of the flute, there was a rustling sound all around, as if some branches and leaves were being moved by an inexplicable force. Then there was the sound of wind as fine as rain. Ji Shunyu's heart skipped a beat. Her body was still in a half-frozen state, and she could not move for a while. But her neck could still move, and she looked towards the direction of the sound. She saw countless green leaves and flower petals shooting towards her from all directions before it even got close. The sharp sound of the wind seemed to tear through the air, bringing with it a sharp whistling sound. This momentum was not inferior to countless hidden weapons that were being shot at him, using sound to control objects. Ji Shunyu had only heard of this kind of martial arts, but she never thought that she would be able to see the real version this time. The white-robed man probably didn't expect this, and his expression changed. He immediately withdrew his hands from Ji Shunyu's body and directly waved his hands in the air, sending waves of light towards those hidden weapons. It was obvious that the light wave he emitted was extremely powerful. As soon as it hit the hidden weapons, they turned into fine powder in the air. Ji Shunyu's heart sank. She was an expert in martial arts. When she saw the man in white make his move, She knew that these green leaves and petals would not be able to do anything to him. After the white-robed man sent out 7 or 8 beams of light to destroy the hidden weapons, he looked behind Ji Shunyu and laughed. Just this little bit. He choked on his words halfway and raised his palm to his chest. It was obvious that the flute player had used his ultimate move again. Ji Shunyu desperately turned her neck to look behind her, and then saw a strange scene. Behind her was the small forest, and from the small forest, a person floated out. She was really floating, and her long black hair was like satin splashed with ink. Chapter 2787. He was really floating. His long black hair was like satin, and his wide blue robe was like a blue haze in the wind. His slender fingers moved up and down on the green jade flute. Rong Yue Tianlan. It was Rong Yue Tianlan. His injuries seemed to have healed at this moment, and his body seemed to be surrounded by a halo. Even the blue robe on his body had a faint glow. As the notes flowed from his fingertips, the crushed green leaves spun rapidly in the air, forming green hedgehog-like balls that flew towards the man in white. Ji Xinyue's eyes widened. Rong Yue Tianlan could use spells here. Was he not restricted by the rules of the Misty Mountain? There were thousands of green hedgehog balls, and each of them was the size of a basketball. They occupied almost all the space around the man in white. The sound of the green balls filled the air. The man in white did not dare to be careless. He subconsciously wanted to grab Ji Shanyue in front of him to block them. However, he did not manage to grab Ji Shanyue's clothes. Instead, he grabbed a green hedgehog ball. Squeak! The green hedgehog ball actually let out a low cry. The man in white also let out a muffled groan and retracted his hand. His palm seemed to be injured. Seeing that the green hedgehog balls were about to hit him, he could only wave his light waves to blast outwards. However, this time, his move did not work. The green hedgehog balls were indeed shattered by his light waves, but they directly shattered into a large cloud of green mist that enveloped the man in white. As more and more of the green hedgehog balls shattered, the green mist surrounding the man in white became thicker and thicker. In the end, it was so thick that it could not be dispersed. Ji Xinyue stood there, protected by the green hedgehog balls. Through the gaps between the green hedgehog balls, she saw a large cloud of green mist enveloping the man in white and gradually retreating. From time to time, the man in white would emit a faint green light that penetrated the green mist. It was powerful, but it could not disperse the green mist around him. The man in white choked and coughed. Ji Xinyue's eyes widened. She did not expect that the notes from a small jade flute would be so powerful. She did not expect Rong Yue Tianlan to have such profound skills. Supreme Immortal. Was this the skill that only Supreme Immortals could use? It was indeed miraculous. Under the effect of the flute, the ice on Ji Xinyue's body finally melted. However, her blood vessels had been frozen for too long, so even if they melted now, they were still numb. She could barely stand. Her body swayed, and the two halves of her dress also swayed. The cold wind blew on her legs, and it was bone-chilling. She helplessly stood in the middle of the battle arena. The wind in the arena tightened and tightened, causing her skirt to flutter again. Her beautiful face flushed red, and she forced her small hands to cover her skirt. Swoosh! A gust of wind sounded, and a robe covered her from head to toe. There was a faint plum fragrance on the robe. Ji Shunyu's heart skipped a beat as she forced her head out of the robe. It was a blue robe, and there seemed to be a faint light flowing on it. Needless to say, it was Rong Yue Tianlan who took it off and threw it to her. Because of this action, the flute music paused for a moment, and the green fog surrounding the white-robed man became much thinner. Ji Shanyue did not have time to think and hurriedly put on the robe, wrapping herself up tightly. His blue robe was unusually big on her, and the hem dragged on the ground, tripping her a little. Chapter 2788. His blue robe was unusually large on her. The hem dragged on the ground, so she lifted it up and tied it around her waist with a belt. It was barely enough for her to wear. The moment she regained her freedom, she quickly retreated from the battlefield. She was not a reckless person, and this was not a battle she could participate in. What she needed to do was not to be a burden to Rongyue Tianlan, and not to foolishly rush up to fight the man in white. The man in white had bullied her to this extent, and this grudge had grown. She had to get back at him, but not now. Rongyue Tianlan had been playing the flute the whole time, and did not exchange a single word with Ji Shunyue, but when she saw her quickly retreating, her eyes showed admiration. The man in white probably finally understood that the green fog around him could not be smacked with his hands, or else the more he smacked, the finer it became, and the finer it became, the more sticky it became. He suddenly retreated like a whirlwind until he was more than 10 feet away and built a light green screen around him, no longer threatened by the green fog. The light green screen was transparent, and Ji Shunyue finally saw the man in white's appearance and was stunned. The man in white should be called the man in green now. His whole body, from his hair to the soles of his feet, was green. His whole person looked like he had been fished out from a green dye vat, and even his handsome face was a miserable green. The green in his hair was even brighter, and from afar, it looked like he was wearing a green hat, and all of his elegance and handsomeness were gone. If not for the fact that this scene was not right, and that Ji Shunyue hated this person so much, she would have laughed out loud when she saw the man in white's appearance. The man in white hid in the light screen, and his eyes were like poisonous knives, staring fiercely at Rongyue Tianlan. "You are actually a great immortal." His voice was cold and dignified, extremely imposing. But when he said the last two words, his nose itched and he sneezed, making the last two words turn in a circle, like a line in an opera, indescribably comical. Of course, the imposing manner disappeared without a trace. The man in white probably also felt that this voice sounded like a drama, and he rubbed his nose in annoyance. But just as he rubbed his nose, he seemed to have thought of something and put his hand down. Looking at his hand that looked like the Hulk, he cursed under his breath. Light flashed on his body, and the green powder on his body was finally repelled by the light wave. He had returned to being a handsome young master. The sound of the flute came to an end. Without the flute's control, the green fog gradually dispersed. The jade flute was hidden in Rongyue Tianlan's sleeve, and a landscape fan was held in his palm. He had always been someone who liked to smile, but at this moment his handsome face was cold and without a trace of smile. His ink-black eyes glanced at the man in white. "Marquis Rongshi." The white-robed man's eyebrows moved slightly, and his eyes were filled with surprise. "How did you recognize me?" "That's not right. You shouldn't recognize me. I haven't left this place for over 10,000 years. Besides, I'm no longer." He paused here, as if he had realized something. Rongyue Tianlan tapped his palm with the handle of the fan, and the corners of his lips curled up slightly. There was a hint of mockery in his eyes. "You're no longer in your original appearance, right? You have indeed changed a lot. Who would have thought that a dwarf would become?" He paused here, and then continued leisurely. "A beautiful man piled up. Since the green fog had dissipated, the man in white naturally removed the light screen around him. Chapter 2789. Since the green fog had dissipated, the man in white had naturally removed the light shield around him. He was originally standing on a big rock with his clothes fluttering in the wind. His expression and even his movements were like that of an elegant young master. However, Rongyue Ishinlin's words seemed to have directly pierced through his painted skin, and he almost jumped up on the spot. His snow-white, handsome face turned green and white, and in that instant, he lost all his elegance. "You're courting death." He crossed his palms and pounced on Rongyue Ishinlin. At this time, Rongyue Ishinlin chuckled and said, "Are you angry from embarrassment? You have to know that some people don't look like an emperor, even when they wear a dragon robe. Just like you, no matter how beautiful your facial features are, they're not your own. People like you only remind people of one word. Ugly people make mischief." Just as Rongyue Ishinlin said these words, The two of them had already fought, and in the blink of an eye, they had exchanged more than 10 moves. Ji Shunyue had never thought that Rong Yuishinlin could be so ruthless. Every word she said was like stepping on Rong Shiho's sore spot, causing him to be enraged. Countless light green light waves attacked Rong Yuishinlin like lightning, wanting to chop her into pieces. As for Rong Yuishinlin, it was only at this moment that Ji Shunyue saw his real kung fu. It came like thunder, and when it left, it was like the calm sea. His movements were extremely fast, and a slender sword was like lightning that broke through the dark clouds, circling around Rong Yuishinlin under his control. The kung fu he was using now was completely different from the one he used to fight the dragon. At that time, he was still joking around and didn't use his full strength. He even schemed against Ji Shunyue so that she couldn't stay out of it. But now, his handsome face, which always liked to smile, didn't have much expression. His thin lips were slightly pursed, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. His aura was originally very strong, but he was always gentle. When he was with Ji Shunyue, he had all kinds of expressions: teasing, humorous, gentle, elegant. This made Ji Shunyue think that he was the most elegant playboy. She had seen him many times, but she had never seen him like this. His handsome face was cold and murderous. Every move was fatal, as if he was possessed by the god of war. Looking at his moves and power, Ji Shunyue's fingers clenched. She was indeed inferior to him. Even if she could use spells and her body was at its peak, she probably wouldn't be able to last more than 50 moves against him. It was no wonder that before he ran away from home, he was crowned as the #1 expert in the Fanning continent. It was not until hundreds of years after he left that this title was replaced by someone else. It seemed that he really lived up to his reputation. Her gaze fell on Rong Shiho again. Rong Shiho was not someone easy to deal with either. The green light in his palm suddenly turned into lightning and then into a ferocious beast, pouncing on Rong Yuetian. Sand and pebbles were flying all over the place. In this kind of life-or-death situation, if one couldn't use spells, there was no way for outsiders to interfere. After such a long time, the blood in Ji Shunyue's body finally flowed freely. She looked at the battlefield for a moment, then suddenly turned around and left, heading straight for the small forest in the distance. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. The two people fighting naturally saw this scene as well. Rong Shiho sneered. "A woman is a woman. You're fighting for her here, but she abandoned you and ran away alone." Rong Yuetian made a sound of acknowledgement and didn't comment. However, while he was talking, she made a few more moves in succession. Her sword pierced through Rong Shiho's ribs, bringing with it a faint black liquid, which should be his blood. Chapter 2790. Rong Shiho snorted and stepped back. Black cheese circled around the wound on his body, and the wound miraculously disappeared. He sneered, "I'm now the king of resentful spirits. Your sword can't hurt me." Before he could finish speaking, Rong Yuishinlin's sword pierced through his shoulder. If he hadn't dodged quickly, the sword would have pierced through his shoulder blade. Rong Shiho's face turned pale. What kind of skill is it to attack someone while they're talking? Don't you exalted immortals fight openly and honorably? Rong Yuishinlin waved his hand, and a slender sword appeared in his hand. His eyes were still cold. "I think you have some misunderstanding about the exalted immortals. It doesn't matter. It's not too late to correct it now." As he spoke, he had already attacked 17 or 18 times. Rong Shiho was so angry that his teeth itched. The exalted immortal in front of him was actually evenly matched with him. Back then, he was unrivaled in the entire Fanning continent. No one was his match, not even the exalted immortals. The 3 exalted immortals in the Fanning continent, who were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns, had all been defeated by him. 2 of them died, and 1 was injured. He thought that he was the absolute king of this continent, and no one would be his match. He didn't expect that after more than 10,000 years, he would meet an opponent like Rong Yuishinlin. Although he died in this misty mountain more than 10,000 years ago due to an accident, he also became the biggest and strongest resentful spirit here. The mountains and waters of Misty Mountain were suitable for resentful spirits to recuperate. In addition, he had devoured many resentful spirits in the past 10,000 years, so his skills were higher than when he was alive. The Misty Mountain had its own rules. No matter how heaven-defying his cultivation was, he was still confined in the predestined bead. He could only come out at certain times to get some fresh air and do what he wanted. However, Ji Xinyue's unintentional mining gave him absolute freedom. Naturally, he was overjoyed. His first thought was to devour the two people who enter the mountain, then pretend to be one of them and sneak out of the mountain. He could run rampant in the Fanning continent again and do something big. When Ji Xinyue was being chased by his resentful spirit subordinates all over the mountain, he had been hiding in the fate bead. He looked arrogant, but he was cautious. He secretly checked the movements of the two people in the bead. His intuition told him that the woman was highly skilled in martial arts. On the other hand, that man didn't even seem to be able to use the most ordinary qigong, so there was nothing to worry about. Therefore, his first plan was to deal with Ji Xinyue. As for the man with her, he looked like an embroidered pillow. His skin was very good, and he could use him directly. He hated women, especially beautiful women. Beautiful women are all trouble. This was an obsession that had been buried in the depths of his heart for over 10,000 years. Whenever he saw a beautiful woman, he wanted to tear her apart. That was why when he appeared, he wanted to kill Ji Xinyue, but accidentally saw her legs. It was a pair of slender but scarred legs. Those scars were like spots on a beautiful jade, covering the color of the jade itself. Those legs were ugly. Such a beautiful woman actually had such a pair of ugly legs. This made him a little surprised, but also a little happy. More than 10,000 years ago, he liked beauties and married beauties. But the beauty betrayed him, which made him gnash his teeth in hatred, and he couldn't stand the beauty anymore. Ever since he had cultivated into a vengeful spirit, he had been lacking women by his side. He was naturally disgusted by beauties and was afraid that she would make him a cuckold. Chapter 2791. And he really had no appetite for ugly women. He also didn't like women with ordinary looks. This was really a contradiction. In this way, he had been a bachelor in the Misty Mountain for more than 10,000 years. Now that he saw Ji Xinyue, he suddenly had the idea of imprisoning her by his side and making her his woman. She had a beautiful face, and he would have a lot of face if he took her out in front of others. She was ugly, and when such a woman took off her clothes, she could scare a bunch of people away. Naturally, she wasn't making him a cuckold. She was really a rare woman who met his requirements. So he began to tease her, and even wanted to use the freezing spell to brand her body with his exclusive brand so that he could always keep her by his side. Of course, if this woman liked the man who came with her, that would be good too. He would snatch the man's body and then fly away with her. In his philosophy, women needed to be subdued by strong means, and only by subduing them would they be obedient. His plan was very good, and he even thought that it would be easy to achieve, but he didn't expect to meet Rongyue Tianlan, an anomaly. This man was obviously an embroidered pillow who couldn't do anything just now, but he didn't expect that after staying in the small forest for such a short time, he would turn from sparrow into a phoenix, into a Shangxian, and become so powerful. What was worse was that this Shangxian had a real intention to kill him as soon as he appeared. Every move he made seemed like he wanted to shatter his soul, and he had never seen those moves before. He couldn't even tell which sect they belonged to. What was worse was that although Rong Shiho's martial arts were very powerful, it also had a drawback. In a fight, one must be calm, and it was best if there were no emotional fluctuations, so that this martial arts could be used to its full potential. But at the beginning of the fight, he was first aroused by desire, and then provoked by Rongyue Tianlan's words. The anger in his heart burned into a ball, making him unable to calm down for a while. It was difficult to use its full potential during a fight. Under such circumstances, he was forced by Rongyue Tianlan into a fluster, and he was actually a little overwhelmed. Naturally, He was unwilling to give up, so he instigated all kinds of discord during the fight, and even tempted him with benefits. For example, he said, "That girl left you and ran away alone, so it can be seen that she has no feelings for you. Why do you have to work so hard? How about this? You came to Misty Mountain to break off the engagement with her, right? Let me go and let me take her. As long as I take her life, your marriage contract will cease to exist. You can also save yourself a lot of trouble. You should know that it's not easy to annul an engagement here. Even if you reach the marriage pillar, you still have to go through the perverted test there. I lost my life in that test, so it's best if you don't go." Rong Shiho felt that he had made the pros and cons clear enough. If the other party was smart, he would listen to his advice. However, Rong Yuetanlan, who was on the opposite side, seemed to have eaten a heavy weight and steeled her heart. She acted as if she did not hear his words and attacked even more ruthlessly. Just now, he only wanted to mess with his soul, but now his move was developing in the direction of destroying his soul. Rong Shiho tried to run away several times, but Rong Yuishinlin was guarding against him so tightly that he couldn't escape from the other party's encirclement. Moreover, this was the scroll of the universe, and space was limited. Even if he wanted to escape, where could he escape to? Ji Shunyu naturally did not run. No matter how dangerous it was, she did not have the habit of abandoning her companions and running away. Chapter 2792. She finally changed into a spare set of clothes in the small forest and felt a little more at ease. She had been naked just now. Although she was covered by a dress, the dress was torn in half at that time. The wind blew her dress, and she was completely exposed. Not only did that bastard Rong Shiho see it, but Rong Yuishinlin also probably saw it too. She didn't want to imagine what Rong Yuishinlin would think when she saw all this. Anyway, she only had one thought now. She had lost a lot of face. She wanted to get back at him and kill Rong Shiho. She would gouge out his eyes and step on them like balls. She quickly changed her clothes and put the set of clothes he threw to her into the storage space. She raised her hand and took a pill that could quickly improve her skills. She sat on the ground for half an hour and felt that her body was full of strength again. Then she rushed out. The originally peaceful and quiet grassland was now filled with flying sand and stones. The sword light was like lightning, wrapped in the nine heavens' divine thunder, shooting toward Rong Shiho like a flower. Each strike was stronger and fiercer than the last. Rong Shiho's body was cut by the sword light. Although his regenerative ability was strong, the injuries were too concentrated. Many of the wounds had not had time to heal before new wounds were added. The blood flowing from his body began to be as thick as ink and slowly became lighter. His white robe was now dyed with patches of blue and white flowers. His hair was also messy, and he looked very miserable. Ji Xinyue stood outside the circle with a knife. She wanted to pounce on Rong Shiho and stab him a few times, but with Rong Yuishinlin's dense sword array, she couldn't intervene. It seemed that Rong Shiho was destined to die in Rong Yuishinlin's hands. Ji Xinyue breathed a sigh of relief, but she was also a little unwilling. She wanted to end that wretched man with her own hands. Once one was at a disadvantage in a fight, it would be extremely difficult to turn the tables again. If one was injured again, it would be even more impossible. Rong Shiho also understood this point, but he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. He naturally saw Ji Xinyue running back and standing not far away to watch the battle. He wanted to rush over and grab Ji Xinyue as a hostage, but Rong Yuishinlin didn't give him the chance. As long as he got a little closer to Ji Xinyue, he would be attacked by Rong Yuishinlin like a storm. Over the past 10,000 years, Rong Shiho had killed many resentful couples here. After these resentful couples met him, they all hoped that he would kill them so that they could be free. These resentful couples could not attack each other. Once they attacked each other and harmed each other, it would be equivalent to breaking the rules here, and they would never be able to leave. However, if the other party was killed by other monsters in the mountains, that would not be the case. Therefore, Those resentful couples who came and all wished that the other party would die in their place. Rong Shiho had never seen the way this couple interacted with each other before. The exalted immortal before him was indeed protecting that young girl. That young girl's eyes never left the battlefield, and her pretty face was filled with unconcealable concern. Rong Yuishinlin's long sword and cultivation method were Dharma treasures that could restrain resentment. Every time Rong Shiho was struck by his sword, the resentment on his body would decrease a little. His body and even his very being were supported by this resentment. As the resentment dissipated, he could not hold on any longer. In the end, his footsteps began to stagger, and every move he made was somewhat lacking in strength. If this continued, he wouldn't be able to hold on for another quarter of an hour. Chapter 2793. Although Ji Shunyue couldn't intervene for the time being, she was a martial arts expert and could naturally see that. She heaved a sigh of relief, but also sighed in her heart. That bastard got off too easy, letting him die so easily. Before she could finish her thought, she suddenly heard the sound of the wind. Rong Yuishinlin had actually flashed to her side. Be good. I can't hold on anymore. You do the rest. Rong Shiho's green light was coming at her. Ji Shunyue couldn't avoid it and could only use her knife to block it. Rong Shiho was obviously an arrow at the end of its flight, so Ji Shunyue easily blocked the green light. After the two of them exchanged blows, Ji Shunyue was relieved. It was time for her to beat him while he was down. She couldn't help but glance at Rong Yuishinlin, who was standing next to her, and her heart was filled with warmth. He was giving her a chance to take revenge on her own. He was really meticulous to have even considered this. He really knew how to take care of people. Ji Shunyue, who had never been taken care of before, felt an indescribable warmth surge in her heart. It was both sweet and sour. Ji Shunyue really hated this Rong Shiho, so she didn't hesitate to beat him while he was down. After a quarter of an hour, Rong Shiho's eyes were blinded by the tip of her knife, and one of his hands was cut off by her. Rong Shiho howled in pain. Ji Shunyue also felt that the anger in her heart was almost vented and was about to add another blow to his vital point. But a sudden change happened in an instant. Before Ji Shunyue's knife tip pierced Rong Shiho's heart, his whole body suddenly emitted a large mass of red light. The red light was extremely coquettish. Ji Shunyue was stimulated by the red light and subconsciously narrowed her eyes. Be careful. A blue figure suddenly pounced on her. Before she could react, he quickly rolled to the side with her in his arms. However, it was too late. In the red light, Rong Shiho laughed and said, "He actually loves you very much." Before he could finish his sentence, the red light directly exploded in his body. Boom! There was a deep crater on the ground. Around the crater, trees had fallen and boulders had shattered. Everything was no longer the same as before. The power of the explosion was too great. In modern terms, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded on the spot. Ji Shunyue was lying at the bottom of the crater. Although at the moment of the explosion, she subconsciously used her inner force to block her hearing. But the aftershocks of the explosion still made her eardrums buzz, and she couldn't hear anything for a long time. Her body was also numb from the shock, and she couldn't feel anything for a while. She wasn't even sure if her limbs were still there. Was he still alive? She didn't know how much time had passed before she finally regained her strength. She could sense her own body, her own limbs. It hurts. After the absolute numbness, pain attacked her nerves again. Her body trembled slightly, as if every cell in her body was in pain. She was extremely resistant to pain, but this kind of pain was unbearable. She originally wanted to endure it out of habit, but Rongyue Tianlan's words suddenly flashed in her mind. If you're in pain, just shout it out. Girls don't have to be so strong. She couldn't help but exclaim softly, "It hurts." There was no movement in his surroundings. No one comforted her. There was only the sound of the wind blowing in her ears. Her mind, which had been muddled by the explosion, suddenly became clear. She vaguely remembered that before the explosion, he had pounced on her. Chapter 2794. Her body trembled, and she forced herself to sit up from the ground. She looked around, and her heart sank. She was the only one in the pit, and there was no sign of Rong Tianlan. Where was he? At the last moment, he was rolling around with her in his arms, and he used his body to protect her. Now that she had survived, what about him? Ji Xinyue stumbled to her feet and searched the big pit like a madman, but she couldn't even find a corner of his clothes. He was already a mighty immortal, and he had such powerful martial arts. It was impossible for a mere explosion to make him disappear, right? Then where could he be? The big pit created by the explosion was very deep, and Ji Xinyue was injured, so it took a lot of effort to climb out of the deep pit. She didn't care about the pain in her body, and after climbing out of the deep pit, she panted and searched around. After she came out and saw the aftermath of the explosion, she realized how serious the explosion was. The small forest in the distance was gone, and the original green mountains and clear waters had become bare and messy. Even the sky, which was originally filled with white clouds, was dark. Thick clouds rolled crazily in the sky, as if a rainstorm was brewing. She was the first to bear the brunt of the explosion. If it wasn't for Rong Tianlan's protection, she, who couldn't use magic to protect herself, would have been blown into a pile of powder. Ji Xinyue didn't dare to think about what Rong Tianlan's sudden disappearance meant. She just subconsciously searched and searched again, not letting go of any corner. She didn't know when the strong wind became biting cold, and it blew on her body like a small knife, messing up her hair and slapping her skin. But she couldn't care less. There was only one thought in her mind, and that was to find him. Even if she only found a broken arm, half of a robe, she didn't know where her body was broken again, and blood dripped down her ankles. Wherever she walked, blood would flow. Rong Tianlan, Rong Tianlan, Rong Tianlan. She called out to him over and over again with a hoarse voice, looking for him hopelessly. The more she looked, the farther she went, until she saw a lake that should have been unfathomable. The reason why it should have been called a lake was because its water was very high from the shore, and this lake should have been full before the explosion because the shore was still wet. The lake should have been behind the small forest. Now that the small forest was gone, the lake was exposed. This huge explosion caused the lake to sink by 4 or 5 meters, and it was precisely because of these 4 or 5 meters that Ji Xinyue finally found him. Rong Tianlan was in the water. He was at the bottom of the lake. Looking across the rippling water, he could see his figure, Rong Tianlan. Ji Xinyue was overjoyed. With a loud cry, she jumped into the water without even thinking about it. It was indeed Rong Tianlan underwater, but his posture was a little strange. He sat there with his palms together in front of him, as if he was meditating. When Ji Xinyue desperately swam to his side, he didn't react at all, sitting there like a stone statue. Ji Xinyue didn't quite understand why he hugged her and rolled around at the moment of the explosion. And after the explosion, Ji Xinyue, was left in the deep pit, but he appeared directly in the lake? Could it be that his body was blown up and flew directly into the lake? But if he was sent flying by the explosion, he shouldn't be in this position, right? Could it be that after he woke up in the water and found out that he was injured, he immediately meditated? Chapter 2795. Ji Xinyue didn't quite understand what had happened to him, but seeing him sitting there perfectly fine, she inexplicably wanted to cry. At the same time, she heaved a sigh of relief. Thank God he was fine. Otherwise, she really didn't know how guilty she would be. It was impossible to breathe while meditating underwater. Ji Xinyue was afraid that he would drown, so she half supported and half carried him to the surface. Fortunately, the water was not deep at this time. She carried him and popped her head out quickly, and with great effort, she carried him to the shore. Originally, she could have done it with a light leap, but now she was sweating profusely from exhaustion. When she placed Rong Tianlan on the shore, she was almost paralyzed from exhaustion, and her vision turned black. She gasped for breath for a while before she recovered. She wiped the sweat on her forehead and said, "Ronyu et Tianlan, how did you fall into the water? You actually flew so far and made me flip over the turf over there." Ronyu et Tianlan sat there quietly beside her with his eyes slightly closed, like a Buddha. To be able to sit there so peacefully, he should be fine, right? And although she was the one who fished him out of the water, his whole body was dry, without a trace of water. Obviously, he had set up a protective enchantment when he was meditating in the water. If he could set up an enchantment, then how serious could his injuries be? Ji Xinhua looked at him worriedly again. There were no wounds on his body, and his ink-black hair draped over his shoulders, not a single strand out of place. His blue robe was like water ripples, and his whole body was dry. He was neat, as if he had just returned from a banquet, and there was not a trace of embarrassment on him. On the other hand, she was originally covered in blood and mud, but after being tossed around in the water, the blood and mud were gone, but her whole body was dripping wet, and her clothes and hair were all sticking to her body. She was like a drowned rat, and couldn't be more embarrassed. In comparison, she looked more like someone had fished her out of the water. Ji Xinhua sighed in her heart that the exalted immortal was indeed an exalted immortal. She moved to his side and looked at his expression and posture. Her expression suddenly changed. His posture had not changed, and even when she dragged him out of the water, he was still in the same position. She paused for a moment, then reached out with her finger and tested it under his nose. Her fingertips trembled slightly. She raised her hand to hold his wrist and felt his pulse. A moment later, her face was even paler than his. He had no breath, no heartbeat, no pulse, and even his arms were cold. He was dead. What was sitting there was actually a corpse. Ji Xinhua's heart felt as if it had been struck by someone. The pain spread to her limbs and bones, and her head was buzzing. He was dead. How could someone like him die? How could an ascendant immortal die so easily? Her face was pale as she busied herself around him. She used all the first aid methods she knew on him, but there was no improvement at all. Ji Xinhua became more and more panicked. Although this person had caused her a lot of harm, he had saved her several times over the past few days. In the Misty Mountains, he had always protected her. This was the first time she had tasted the feeling of being protected like a little girl. But now this person was dead. His death was so strange. He actually loved you very much. Ji Xinhua's mind suddenly recalled the words Rong Shiho had said before he died. At that time, the situation was too dangerous, so she didn't pay attention to those words. But now they suddenly appeared in her mind. Chapter 2796. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. She stared at him, who was sitting there in a daze. He loved her? Was that possible? Didn't he like her little sister? How could he like her? If he really liked her, why would he come to Misty Mountain with her and take such a huge risk to break off the engagement? She believed that if he really loved her, he would definitely not break off the engagement. If he didn't want to break off the engagement, her father, the South Heaven Emperor, would naturally not want to break off the engagement. Even if she wanted to break off the engagement, he wouldn't have cooperated. There wouldn't be such a scene here. But if he didn't love her, why would he risk his life to save her? In that situation, he was completely acting instinctively. He instinctively used his life to protect her. Could it be that he was still feeling guilty? But according to legend, this person liked to owe people favors. He wasn't someone who would feel guilty after owing someone a favor, but it was hard to say. After all, this person had been wandering outside for so many years. His personality might have suddenly changed. She thought about it, and all kinds of thoughts came one after another. Her chest seemed to be hiding a pot of boiling water, rolling over and over. She suddenly shook her head. Now was not the time to think about this. She looked at him, who was sitting quietly with his eyes closed. Other than the lack of breath, he looked like he was sleeping. He didn't look like a dead person at all. She didn't give up and circled around him again. She touched his nose and his chest again. Her heart was so flustered that it didn't seem like her own. She couldn't calm down no matter what. She didn't believe that he was dead. She wanted him to take another breath. His life was only a single breath away. She desperately thought about all kinds of first aid methods. Suddenly, a light flashed in her mind. She suddenly thought of a way. She pounced on Rong Yu Tianlan, who was sitting there, and pushed him to the ground. Then, she began to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She wasn't familiar with it. When she pressed on his chest, the strength was not right. Even when she forced open his mouth to pass air into his mouth, her lips knocked against his teeth. When Rong Yu Tianlan woke up, he saw this scene when he opened his eyes. A girl who was drenched from head to toe was half lying on top of him. Her pretty face was pale, and her face was serious. Her eyes were wide open, and her slightly cold lips were pressed against his, blowing air into his mouth with all her might. Her breath was like an orchid, blowing into his mouth, causing his heart to skip a few beats the moment he woke up. He widened his eyes and looked at her without any reaction. On the other hand, she was a little dizzy from continuously blowing air into him. When she started to give him air, her lips touched his for the first time. She was still a little nervous, and her lips were still trembling. But later on, she had been busy saving people and had completely forgotten that the person under her body was a man. She only had the thought of helping him regain his breath. Although she wanted him to wake up, she didn't expect him to wake up at this time. At that time, her lips were still pressed against his, and the two of them just stared at each other for a while, neither of them reacting. Rong Yu Tianlan was restraining herself from reacting, while Ji Shun Yu had forgotten to react in hindsight. After a while, Rong Yu Tianlan, who was under her, moved. Her eyes blinked slightly, and her head tilted slightly to the side. Their lips parted, and her soft lips brushed past his cheek. She seemed to wake up from a dream and suddenly raised her head. She raised her head too quickly, and she was a little dizzy. Chapter 2797. She lifted her head too quickly and felt a little dizzy. This action almost made her roll away from his body and land beside him. In her nervousness, she asked a stupid question. "You're awake?" She was clearly saving someone, but she looked like she had done something bad and was caught red-handed. A blush crept up her cheeks. Rong Yu Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly, as deep as a pool of water. It stayed on her face for a moment, then quickly moved away. He slowly propped himself up and tried to sit up, but he was a little weak and fell back down weakly. Ji Xinyue was quick to react. Almost without thinking, she stretched out her arms and hugged him from behind. He fell in her arms, but this posture was a little intimate. The redness on Ji Xinyue's face that had just faded seemed to spread again, but she forced herself to be calm. She quickly straightened him up and teased him. "When did you become so weak? You're still an immortal." She said these teasing words to ease the inexplicable tension in her heart and the slightly ambiguous atmosphere between the two of them. She thought that with Rong Yu Tianlan's usual temperament, he might take advantage of the situation to lie on her and say, "I've always been this weak. It's not like you've never known. Come, straighten me up," or something that deserved a beating. But she obviously thought too much. After Rong Yu Tianlan sat down, he actually cupped his hands and bowed to her. "Thank you, princess." He was very polite and courteous, just like his usual elegant self. Ji Xinyue's heart sank inexplicably. The smile that had just appeared on her lips froze on her face. She paused for a moment before replying, "You're welcome." Her tone was a little dry. A thank you and a "you're welcome." It invisibly widened the distance between them. Ji Xinyue didn't understand him. Ever since she knew him, his attitude towards her had always been a little strange. There was seriousness in his sloppiness, and he had always been very concerned about her. Especially after entering this mountain, he was always concerned about her and protecting her. Although sometimes he was a little rude, his concern for her was not fake. It was also because of his attitude that she was able to quickly close the distance between them. She went from being wary and annoyed of him at the beginning to speaking with him in a familiar and unrestrained manner. She didn't know when he had occupied a position in her heart that wasn't too big or too small. Just as she was wondering what this position was, he suddenly became cold. Did he lose his memory? Or did he take the wrong medicine? You, do you remember what happened just now? Ji Shun Yu decided to probe. Rong Yuetian closed her eyes slightly and didn't look at her. I remember. We killed Rong Shiho. He didn't lose his memory. Ji Shun Yu let out a sigh of relief. Then, do you remember what happened after you killed him? Rong Yuetian opened her eyes and looked at her. The bottom of her eyes was calm. You don't have to ask. I didn't lose my memory. Before Rong Shiho died, he risked everything and wanted to drag us down with him. He used the soul-splitting technique and almost turned the world upside down. His gaze finally fell on her body again. Her body was still wet, and her pink dress was full of spots of blood. You're injured again? Ji Shun Yu did not care about her injuries. She still had a lot of questions she wanted to know. You clearly rolled around with me in your arms to protect me. How come after the explosion, I stayed at the bottom of the pit, but you ran so far away and fell into this lake? Rong Yuetian sighed. I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here. Chapter 2798. Rong Yuetian sighed. I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here. The one who fought with Rong Shiho was my nascent soul, not my real body. The explosion was too fierce, and I couldn't bear it for a while, so my nascent soul disappeared. Just now it was successfully condensed, so it returned to its original body and woke up. Soul detachment technique. He actually knew the legendary soul detachment technique. No wonder he could use his spiritual force without any scruples when fighting with Rong Shiho. It turned out that he was also a soul. It wasn't strange for a person's soul to detach occasionally, but after the soul left the body, it couldn't do anything. At most, it could peep. However, Rong Yuetian's soul could fight like a real body, which was unprecedentedly powerful. Based on what he said, it was his soul that protected her in the critical moment. The reason why he could wake up was not because she gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but because he automatically gathered his soul. Ji Shun Yu didn't know what to feel. Her eyes couldn't help but look at him. Just now? Thank you. If it wasn't for his soul protecting her, she was afraid that she would have been blown to pieces. At this time, she didn't know where the wandering soul was floating. Also, thank you for giving her the opportunity to kill Rong Shiho for revenge. Rong Yuetian lowered his eyes. This time, he finally smiled. You don't have to be polite with me. After all, I owe you for coming to Misty Mountain. Besides, in that situation, even if it wasn't you but someone else, I would have saved them. Ji Shun Yu's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she slowly repeated, You owe me? Even if it wasn't you, I would have saved them. He was a mighty immortal, so it wasn't strange that he had great love and compassion. Ji Shun Yu's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she asked, What do you owe me? Rong Yuetian didn't open his eyes to look at her. After all, I delayed you for more than 3,000 years and caused you to suffer so much. So you've always wanted to compensate me, right? Ji Shun Yu interrupted him and answered on his behalf. Yes, Ji Shun Yu's face paled slightly, but she smiled. As expected of someone who cultivated to become a heavenly immortal, you don't want to owe anyone anything. Actually, I've already said that this marriage can't be entirely blamed on you. I don't have any other good points, but I'm magnanimous, so I don't care about this anymore. Therefore, you can keep your guilt to yourself in the future. I don't care either. Rong Yuetian was speechless. He paused and spoke again in a faint voice. I will try my best not to feel guilty. All right, you don't have to take Rong Shiho's last words to heart. He didn't know anything at all. What did he say in the end? Didn't he explode with a bang in the end? Ji Shun Yu interrupted him and stood up. You rest first. I'll go over there and take a look. She turned around and was about to leave. Your injury. Rong Yuetian couldn't help but open her mouth. Her gaze was fixed on her dress that was gradually stained with blood. The dark clouds were still rolling overhead, and the world was dark, but he could clearly see the bloodstains on her dress. It was so glaring. Ji Xinyue didn't answer. Her voice was faint. "It's just a small injury. I won't die." She turned around and strode away. Rong Yuishinlin was obviously seriously injured. Although he had woken up, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, and even the tip of his nose was dripping with cold sweat. Chapter 2799. Just now, he was still able to sit when he was out of breath, but now that he had regained his breath, he sat unsteadily. He finally fell down again, looking up at the rolling dark clouds in the sky. His fingers slowly clenched, and he closed his eyes. "I'm sorry, Xinyu. Only now do I know that I have other emotional debts. In my previous life, I let her down and let her die with hatred. In this life, I won't let her down again. But I'm destined to let you down." He finally regained his memories. That's not right. These memories shouldn't belong to him completely, but to a part of his soul. Originally, when a battle soul reincarnated, it shouldn't have any memories when it returned to its original body, and he shouldn't have regained this memory. But perhaps that feeling was too deep, too heart-wrenching, and actually left a faint impression in his mind. For example, there was the figure of the girl in pink in his mind. There was her hazy appearance, and there was even a dance. Even if it was just a figure, he didn't really care about it. He only faintly felt that the girl in his mind should be his destined lover. Especially when Shanjuli told him that his Red Lawn Star movement, he subconsciously felt that if he really did have Red Lawn Star movement, perhaps he would meet that girl, fall in love, get to know her, and finally travel the three realms hand in hand like Shanjuli and Ningxiuma. When he first saw Ji Tianyue, the girl's image in his mind suddenly became clear and highly overlapped with Ji Tianyue. Especially her expression, actions, and personality were even more similar. He thought that the heavens were not unkind to him, that he found the girl in his dreams so quickly it couldn't be any smoother. He thought that he would naturally fall in love with the girl in his dreams, but he didn't expect that when he interacted with this girl, his heart wouldn't be stirred at all. He looked at her as if he was looking at an ignorant and naive child, and couldn't find any feelings of affection. He repeatedly pondered in his heart for a long time, and felt that the reason why he didn't have any feelings for Ji Tianyue was probably because he didn't like father-daughter relationships. If he had other thoughts about an underage girl, maybe it would be wretched. He felt that he would fall in love with her in the future. After all, she was the girl in his dreams. But he didn't know when it started. But his gaze was uncontrollably attracted to Ji Shenyu, and his thoughts couldn't help but revolve around her. Whenever he saw her chatting and laughing with other men, he would be very unhappy. When he saw her sad, he couldn't help but want to comfort her. When he saw her happy, he would be as bright as the sun. When he saw her hurt, he wanted to kill the person who hurt her. He had always thought that he felt guilty towards this girl. However, during these few days of adventure in the Misty Mountain, he gradually understood that it was not the case. When he was trapped by the Snake Beauty, the Snake Beauty transformed into the person he cared about the most in the depths of his heart, Ji Shenyu. The Snake Beauty that was pestering him was much more powerful than the one that was pestering Ji Shenyu. Her human form was exactly the same as Ji Shenyu's, and she even hid her snake tail. When she pounced on his body and pestered him, he could even smell the unique fragrance on her body. Because they were too similar, even though he had sensed that something was wrong, he couldn't do it. In his life, he had killed countless demons and devils. As long as he could see through the other party's disguise, he had never shown mercy. He had encountered a heart image snake before, and that heart image snake had even transformed into his good friend Yunshi's appearance to seduce him. He didn't say anything and killed it with a single sword strike, without even blinking an eye. Chapter 2800. And this time, even though he knew that the other party was an illusory demon, he could not do anything to that face. It was also because of this that he fought with the heart image snake for so long, until the heart image snake's physical strength was exhausted and it finally revealed its true form. Only then did he strangle it to death without any hesitation. The fight with the heart image snake had exhausted a lot of his physical strength, and there were many wounds on his body. However, he could not care less and immediately rushed to find Ji Shinyu, because he knew that the heart image snake would not appear. Once it appeared, it would easily form a pair and attack two people separately. His guess was right. Ji Shinyu was indeed entangled by the heart image snake. If he wanted to save her from the heart image snake, he could not act rashly, because the heart image snake entangled not only the human body, but also the soul. If he acted blindly, not only would he not be able to save her, he would also hurt her soul, and it might even cause her soul to scatter. If he wanted to save her unharmed, he could only use the flute to melt the ice around her body and stimulate the snake to return to its original form. And this flute sound was not an ordinary flute sound. It had to be played with a special blowing method. And this special blowing method required psychokinesis. Left with no choice, he could only use the soul shell shedding technique, using his soul to blow this special flute sound. As expected, he had succeeded. The ice on her body melted. She no longer allowed the snake to do whatever it wanted. She sliced the snake open while it was still alive. The snake even looked like him. She did not hesitate at all when she made her move. At that time, he did not know what to feel when he saw it. Although he was very gratified that she was not mesmerized by the heart image snake's illusion, that clean-cut her blade made him shiver. Using the soul detachment technique in Misty Mountain required more than half of his strength, and he was also injured. The soul detachment technique and the flute sound made his injuries worse, and he could not even use his light body technique. Of course, it was not that he could not use it. If he worked hard, he could still walk normally. However, when he saw Ji Shinyu cleanly cut in half, he felt a little uncomfortable and could not help but want to find some trouble for her so that she could take him away. This girl was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. When he was a little weak, her maternal instincts immediately flared up, and she took good care of him. He felt that his wounded soul was slightly comforted. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what kind of feelings he had for her, but subconsciously, he didn't want to go their separate ways after breaking off the engagement. So, he wanted to take her in as a disciple, but he didn't expect her to be so loyal to her master. He even felt that she liked her master. This feeling made him very unhappy. Before he could think of a way to deal with it, she had already discovered the Yuan bead. This led to a series of unforeseen events later on. Ji Shinyu, Rongyue Tianlan, Rongyue Tianlan. This person was known as the #1 person in the Fanning continent 13,000 years ago. Although his appearance was not very good, his evil techniques were top-notch. In the past, he was a person who could do whatever he wanted in the Fanning continent. His excellent bone structure and mind made him extremely proud, but his dwarf body and ordinary appearance made him feel extremely inferior. His extreme arrogance and inferiority complex made him violent and cold, and the way he did things was a little confusing. It was unknown how many people had died at his hands back then. Perhaps it was a sin, but Rong Shiho took a fancy to a famous, beautiful fairy in Shunyu Tianhen. You're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.